What would you do if the stranger who saved your life walked into the room and had no idea who you were? A billionaire, a blind date, a bridge in a snowstorm 7 years ago. One of them remembers everything, the other remembers nothing. Tonight, in a small café with rain hammering the windows and 2 cups of coffee going cold, the past is about to crash into the present, and neither of them is ready for what it's going to cost them. This is the story of Asher Monroe and Emily Carter. Stay until the end, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down the way it always does in late October in the city. Not in sheets, not dramatically, but in that relentless grinding drizzle that soaks through your collar before you realize it's happening. The kind of rain that doesn't announce itself. It just wears you down. Asher Monroe sat in the back of his car and stared at the cafe across the street. Brentwood Grounds. The sign above the door flickered once, twice, like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. The windows were fogged from the inside, smudged with the warmth of people who had somewhere to be and someone to be with. He could see the soft orange glow of pendant lights hanging over small tables. He could see a woman in an apron wiping down the counter. He could see, in other words, exactly the kind of place a person went when they wanted to feel less alone. He hadn't wanted to come. "You sure about this, Mr. Monroe?" said Marcus from the front seat. His driver, his shadow for the last 4 years. A thick man in his 50s with kind eyes and the professional habit of saying the right thing at the wrong time. "No," Asher said. "You want me to wait?" "You always wait." "That's not what I asked." Asher looked at him in the rearview mirror. Marcus's eyes were steady, not judging, never judging, just watching, the way people watch someone they're worried about. "1 hour," Asher said. "If I'm not out in 1 hour, come in and tell me the office called." "The office is closed on Thursdays." "Make something up, Marcus." Marcus nodded once and turned back to face the wheel. Outside, a couple ran past the car laughing, sharing an umbrella that was barely doing its job, and Asher watched them go with an expression that wasn't quite envy and wasn't quite nothing. He pulled out his phone. 8:47 p.m. The message from Diana, his assistant, his scheduler, his keeper of all things, read, "Her name is Emily Carter, 30 years old. She'll be wearing something blue. Table 4. She's already confirmed." He read it twice. Then he put the phone in his coat pocket. 32 years old, worth somewhere north of $2.3 billion, depending on the quarter. Owner of Monroe Capital, a private equity firm that had its fingers in real estate, green technology, and 2 media companies that between them reached something like 80 million people. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. His name had appeared in the Wall Street Journal so many times that one of his lawyers joked they should just give him a column. He had a daughter, Lily, 5 years old, with his dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and a laugh that could, on the right day, make him feel like a completely different person. She was at home right now with her nanny, Elena, probably refusing to go to sleep and demanding one more episode of that animated show about the girl and the talking wolf. He had, by almost every measure anyone would care to apply, everything. And he sat in the back of a black car in the rain and could not make himself open the door. It had been Diana's idea, or rather, Diana had been the one who finally said out loud what the people around him had been thinking for 2 years. "You need to stop disappearing into work," she'd said, not unkindly, 3 months ago. She'd come into his office at 7 in the evening on a Friday, which, for the record, she was not supposed to be at the office on Fridays, and certainly not at 7, and placed a coffee on his desk with the quiet authority of someone who had earned the right to say difficult things. "I'm not disappearing," he'd said, not looking up from the contract on his desk. "You missed Lily's school play." "I sent flowers." "She's 5. She doesn't want flowers. She wanted her father in the 3rd row." He had put down the contract then, because the thing about Diana was that she was almost always right, and what made her valuable and occasionally infuriating was that she knew it. "Set something up," he'd said. "One date, one time." Diana had set up 3. 2 had been, in different ways, disasters. One woman who turned out to be primarily interested in being photographed near him, and one who was perfectly pleasant and completely hollow, like talking to a very well-dressed echo. The third had canceled on him the morning of, A text message of 4 words. Something came up. Sorry. He'd taken that as the universe telling him something. Then Diana had come back with Emily Carter from some boutique matchmaking service she'd found. And she'd said, "This one's different." He'd said, "You said that about the last one." I said she was interesting. That's different from different. What does her profile say? That she's kind, that she's real, that she's had a hard life and built something from it anyway. That's not a profile. That's a greeting card. Just go, Asher. So he'd gone. He was here. And he was sitting in the rain outside a cafe with steamed-up windows, staring at the flickering sign, trying to remember why this had seemed like a reasonable idea at any point. He opened the door. The cafe smelled like ground coffee and cinnamon, and it was warmer inside than he'd expected, that particular warmth you only find in places where the heat has been running for hours. Jazz was playing from somewhere, not loud enough to notice at first, just there, underneath everything, the low murmur of a trumpet working through something slow and tired. There were maybe a dozen tables, several occupied. A young couple in the corner with their heads bent over one phone. 2 older women with large mugs and a book between them. A man in a beanie working on a laptop with the focused misery of someone who'd been at it for hours. Table 4 was in the back near the window. It was empty. Asher checked his watch, 8:53. He was on time. She was late. He took off his coat, sat down, and flagged down a server, young, college age, wearing an apron that had seen better days, and ordered black coffee because he didn't want it but needed something to do with his hands. He looked at his phone. Nothing from Diana, which meant she was respecting his wishes to not be managed tonight, which he appreciated and also found mildly terrifying. He looked at the empty chair across from him. He thought about Lily, probably still awake, watching her wolf show with the volume too loud. He thought about the last time he'd actually felt something with another person that wasn't professional or transactional or careful. It had been so long ago that the memory didn't have sharp edges anymore. It had gone soft and vague, like a photograph left in sunlight. His coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around it without drinking. 8:58, 9 o'clock, 9:04. He was reaching into his coat pocket for his phone to text Marcus when the door to the cafe opened and the cold came in with it, and he looked up. She was not what he had expected. He didn't know exactly what he'd expected, but it wasn't this. She was dressed simply. Dark jeans, worn at the knees, not as a fashion choice. A blue cardigan that was clean but had been washed many times. A scarf the color of winter sky looped twice around her neck. Her hair was dark and slightly damp at the ends from the rain, and she hadn't fixed it. She just pushed it back from her face and walked in. No performance, no entrance. She was carrying a canvas tote bag that was too heavy for whatever was in it, and she had the posture of someone who had learned to take up less space than they needed. Not beaten down. That wasn't quite it. More like someone who had made a quiet, practical truce with the world. She looked around the cafe, and then she found him. Table 4, the man in the expensive gray coat draped over the chair, the dark coffee in his hands. And she went absolutely still. She did not look surprised. She looked like the ground had moved. Her hand came up to her mouth, just briefly, just for a second, and then she pulled it back down and stood there in the doorway of the cafe while the cold air pushed in around her and the door swung shut behind her. Asher frowned. He had the strange sensation that he was missing something important, that there was a conversation already happening that he hadn't been told about. Then her eyes filled. She didn't cry. Not right then. Not in that public, messy way that would have made the whole room look. She just filled up, eyes going bright and wet, and she blinked it back with the practiced control of someone who had learned to cry only when they were alone. Then she walked toward table 4. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, pulling out the chair and sitting down. Her voice was steady, almost too steady, the kind of steady you work for. "It's fine," he said, and then, because something in the air felt strange and unbalanced, "Are you okay?" "Yes." She set her bag down by her feet. "I'm sorry, I just—" She stopped, looked at him directly for the first time, and something moved across her face that he couldn't name. "I'm just glad you're still here. I thought maybe you'd already left." I almost did. I know, I almost didn't come in. He waited. She took a breath and picked up the small menu on the table, looked at it, set it back down. A woman who had wanted something to do with her hands just like he had. I should introduce myself, she said. I'm Emily. Asher. She nodded, like she already knew. Do you want coffee? He asked. Or something else. They have tea if you… Coffee's fine. He signaled the server again. They sat in a silence that should have been awkward. Two strangers in a cafe, first date, all the usual pressures, and wasn't, or wasn't quite. There was something else in the silence, something she was carrying that he could feel without being able to see. I have to be honest with you, Emily said when the coffee came. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Okay. I'm not… She stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. She was choosing words with a care that told him this was something she'd been rehearsing. I didn't come here because of the matchmaking service. Not exactly. Meaning what? Meaning I agreed to the date because… Another pause. Longer this time. In the background, the trumpet wound through something that sounded like a question. Because I recognized your photo. Asher set his cup down. Recognized it from where? Emily looked at him for a long moment. In the light of the cafe, the warm orange glow of the pendants, the rain making patterns on the window glass beside them, she looked both very young and very old at the same time, the particular look of someone who has survived more than their age suggests. From 7 years ago, she said, from a night I've never been able to forget. A bridge, a snowstorm. Her voice dropped half a notch. You. The cafe kept going around them. The couple in the corner, the clatter of cups behind the counter, the trumpet in the background. But at table 4, something shifted. The air changed. Asher Monroe went very still. He didn't remember her. He should have. Maybe. Anyone with an ounce of decency should have remembered something like that. But the truth was, and he'd live with the guilt of this later, he didn't. He remembered the night. November. 7 years back. He'd been 25, newly rich in the aggressive, terrifying way that you can only be when you've made your first real money before you fully understand what it means. Monroe Capital had just closed its second fund. He'd been working 16-hour days and sleeping 5 hours a night and surviving on black coffee and the kind of focused panic that gets mistaken for ambition. It had been a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. He'd long since lost the ability to tell the days apart back then. He was driving himself home, which he did sometimes when the solitude of the car felt necessary. No Marcus yet in those days. Just him and the empty highway and the snow coming down in a way that was starting to get serious. The city was muffled. The world had shrunk to what the headlights could show. He'd seen her on the bridge. He hadn't processed it immediately. His brain was tired, his mind was elsewhere. But then some older, quieter part of him had said, "Look again." He'd pulled over. He'd gotten out of the car into the snow. He remembered the cold. He remembered the way the bridge felt underfoot, that particular hollow sound of footsteps on a suspension bridge in winter. He remembered walking toward a figure who hadn't moved when his headlights hit her. But the face? Her name? What they'd said to each other in the snow? He'd buried it somewhere, or he'd never really held on to it in the first place. And now she was sitting across from him in a cafe with warm, fogged windows, and she remembered every word. "Awesome. You told me you were lost once," Emily said. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee mug. She wasn't looking at him now, so she was looking at the surface of the liquid, the way people look when they're narrating from memory, calling something up from a place they keep carefully sealed. "You said you didn't mean it in a metaphorical way. You meant it literally. That once, when you were 17, you'd gotten turned around in a blizzard and couldn't find your way back to your uncle's house, and for about 20 minutes you genuinely thought you might not make it." Asher's chest contracted. "You said," Emily continued, "that what saved you wasn't any particular skill or direction. It was the decision to keep walking, to just pick one direction and move." He remembered telling that story. He'd never told it to many people. It wasn't something he typically shared, but he'd told it that night on the bridge, to keep her talking, to keep her there, to fill the cold air with words. You said you didn't know if that advice applied to anything outside of literal blizzards, Emily said, and something like an almost smile moved at the corner of her mouth and didn't quite arrive. But you said it anyway. He didn't trust his voice. He hadn't expected this, any of this, and he was not a man who handled being caught off guard with any kind of grace. You stayed for almost an hour, she said. You never called anyone. You didn't make a big deal of it. You just talked to me, like I was a person. She paused. That sounds like a low bar. It's not a low bar. No, she agreed quietly. That night, it wasn't. The rain picked up outside. They could both hear it, a shift in intensity, that brief roar when the volume increases before settling back. And the fogged window blurred and cleared and blurred again. Asher looked at Emily Carter across a small table covered with a white paper cloth, and he tried to reconcile the woman in front of him with the figure he barely remembered from a bridge in the snow. 7 years of living were written in her face if you knew how to look, not in lines or damage exactly, but in a kind of density. The eyes of someone who has been required to understand things quickly. You didn't introduce yourself, he said. That night, did you? No. You didn't tell me your name. No. And you didn't ask. A beat. I always thought that was interesting. You never asked my name. He didn't know what to do with that, so he was honest. I think I was afraid if I asked, you'd feel studied, like I was collecting data instead of just being there. She looked at him, a long, careful look. That's actually exactly right, she said. I would have, at the time. But I also didn't give you my name. No, you didn't. She shifted in her chair, a small, involuntary movement. Do you know how long it took me to find you? With no name, no description beyond dark coat, black car, doesn't ask for your name. How long? About 4 years, on and off. I found a business card once, left by someone with a black car parked in the same area near that bridge. It was for a financial services company. The name was smudged. She let out a small breath. I told myself I was just curious, that it wasn't... She stopped. Wasn't what? She looked out the window. The rain moved in the amber light of the street lamp outside, each drop catching the light for half a second before it was gone. I told myself I just wanted to say thank you, that it was closure, that finding you wasn't important, that it didn't matter. But it did. Yes. Simple. No embellishment. It mattered. They sat with that for a moment. Then Asher, because he was a man who had made his fortune by asking the questions other people were too polite to ask, said, What happened after that night? Emily looked back from the window. What happened after? You said what I said helped you. What did that look like, actually? Why do you want to know? Because you came here and you sat down and you told me something I won't forget, and now I'd like to know what came after. She studied him, deciding. Most people want the short version, she said. The redemption arc. The highlight reel. I don't want the highlight reel. Emily picked up her coffee mug, set it down, picked it up again. The small fidgeting of someone who is about to say something true. I almost didn't get off the bridge, she said. Even after you left. I stood there for a long time after your car disappeared. I didn't move for, I don't know how long enough that I was completely numb. Feet, hands, everything. He waited. What eventually got me moving was the cold, she said, which is ironic, I guess. It wasn't the conversation. It wasn't a decision. It was just that I was physically so cold I had to move or I was going to fall over. She looked at him without apology. I don't know if that ruins the story for you. It doesn't ruin anything. I walked home. To the room I was renting in a house that had 4 other people in it, 2 of whom I was pretty sure were not operating entirely within the law. I didn't sleep. I lay there and I thought about what you'd said about the blizzard, about picking a direction. She was quiet for a moment. The next morning, I called a number I'd been ignoring for 2 weeks, a counselor at a community center. I'd had the number on a piece of paper in my jacket pocket for a while. What happened when you called? She answered, which sounds small, but it was a Thursday morning and I expected voicemail. The ghost of something crossed her face. She answered, and she said, "I'm glad you called. Not, can I help you? Not, how can I assist you? Just, I'm glad you called." And something in me just... She stopped. I don't have a better word than broke. But in the good way. If that makes sense. It makes sense. I cried for about 20 minutes on the phone with a woman I'd never met, and then she made me an appointment for the next day, and I went. Emily set down her mug. That's where it started. That's the actual beginning of the version where I'm still here. They talked for a long time, not in the way of first dates, the organized exchange of backgrounds and opinions and carefully curated self-presentations. Emily was constitutionally incapable of that, and Asher, who had done it enough to recognize its particular emptiness, had no interest in performing it tonight. She told him about the years that followed the bridge, about the counseling sessions that were harder than she'd expected because the truth turned out to be more complicated than she'd ever let herself see, about the job at a printing company she'd taken because it paid steadily, even if the work was loud and physically punishing and left her hands ink-stained for 3 years, about the night classes she'd taken in accounting, 2 nights a week, sitting in a community college classroom with 18 and 19-year-olds who couldn't figure out why this woman in her mid-20s was working so hard for something so boring. She told him about her apartment, a studio, 600 square feet, the first place she'd ever lived alone, and how the first night she'd slept there she'd cried again, but not from sadness. She told him about her friend Clara, who ran a used bookshop downtown and whose particular gift was telling you the truth about yourself without making you feel destroyed by it. About the small financial consulting business she'd started 18 months ago. Just herself, 1 laptop, and a client base built entirely from word of mouth. Not rich, not stable, exactly, but hers. She told him all of this without the performance of someone narrating a success story. She told it the way you tell something to someone you're not sure you'll see again, with the specificity of someone getting it on record, in case this is the last chance. Asher listened. This was not something he was particularly good at. He was by nature and by the demands of his profession, a talker, a persuader, a room mover. He had people on his payroll whose function was essentially to listen to him. He had built a career on the assumption that his perspective was the most useful one in the room. But tonight, at table 4, he listened, and he found, unexpectedly, inconveniently, that something in his chest had loosened. Some tight, structural thing that he'd been managing for so long, it had started to feel like just how he was. You want to know what the worst part of that time was? Emily said. They were nearly an hour in, and she'd just told him about the printing company. About the afternoon a machine had jammed and she'd reached in without thinking and come out with a 3-inch gash across her palm. She held up her left hand in the café light. There was still a scar there, thin now, silver, running from the base of her middle finger toward her wrist. "What was it?" Asher asked. "It wasn't the hard stuff," she said. "It wasn't the bad jobs or the small rooms or the months when I counted change to see if I could buy groceries. That stuff was hard. But it made sense, it had a logic." She lowered her hand. "The worst part was not being able to explain to people around me why I was trying, why I was getting up every morning and putting in the work for a future I couldn't see yet. Because you didn't know how to answer without telling them everything." "Yes." She looked at him, a flash of something, relief, recognition. "And I couldn't tell them everything. I wasn't ready. So I just looked like someone grinding away at something for no clear reason. And the people around me at the time were not," she searched for the word. "They weren't bad people, but they were comfortable with things staying the way they were, and I kept moving forward, and eventually we just..." She spread her hands. "You moved in different directions." Which sounds nicer than it felt. She picked up her coffee. It was nearly cold now, but she drank it anyway. "The worst thing about surviving is that sometimes you outgrow the people who knew you before, and you can't explain to them why. You just go a different way." Asher was quiet for a moment. Outside, something changed in the rain. It was easing, maybe, or just shifting, and the window ran with new patterns. "I understand that more than you might expect," he said. She looked at him. "When Monroe Capital took off," he said slowly, picking his way through it, he didn't talk about this often, and he could feel the unfamiliarity of the words. "I had friends from before. from the years when I was no one. And I thought, money changes things for the better. Now I can take care of the people around me. Now things are easier." He paused. "But money doesn't flatten. It amplifies. If there were cracks, they got wider. And the friendships that depended on me being struggling, relatable, accessible, those didn't survive." "I'm sorry," Emily said, not with the reflexive sympathy of someone filling silence. She meant it. It was a long time ago. He picked up his own mug, which was also cold, and drank it anyway. "I just know what you mean about outgrowing, even if the mechanism was different." He told her about Lily. He hadn't planned to. He was careful about his daughter, kept her off social media, didn't discuss her in interviews. But in the context of this conversation, it would have been strange not to. It would have been one of those deliberate omissions that changes the shape of everything around it. "She's 5, he said. "She has her mother's—" He stopped, started over. "She's stubborn in the best way, like she's already decided who she is, and you can either get on board or get out of the way." "Where's her mother?" Emily asked. No sugarcoating, just the question. "We were together for 2 years. Lily was not planned, but we weren't unhappy about it. We thought we could make it work." He set down his cup. "We were wrong. Her mother's in Portland now. She and I have a custody arrangement. She's a good mother. We're just not—" He thought about it honestly. "We're not suited. We never really were. We were 2 people who liked each other and convinced ourselves it was more than that." "How long have you been doing it alone?" 3 years. That's a long time. Some days it feels long. Other days it feels like the only thing I've done that makes any sense." Emily was quiet for a moment. He watched her face, the way she processed things without performing the processing, without the studied nods and sympathetic tilts of the head that he'd come to associate with conversations that were fundamentally performances. "What is she like?" Emily asked. "What?" "Lily. What does she like?" He almost laughed. And did, a small one, a real one. "She likes this show about a girl and a talking wolf. She likes mac and cheese with a specific ratio of sauce to noodle that I am still working to reproduce correctly. She likes to sleep with the closet light on, but the door cracked, not fully open. She likes to tell me about her dreams in the morning, but only if I ask, never volunteered." He caught himself. He was smiling. "She told me last week that she thought the moon was shy." Emily smiled, a full one this time, the first he'd seen, and it was different from what he'd expected, not polished. It arrived unevenly, one side first, and it took over her whole face. "The moon is shy," she said. "That's the best thing I've heard in months. She's like that. She just says things that make you think the world is a different shape than you thought. She sounds incredible. She makes everything else feel very—" He searched for the word. "Small, in the best possible sense, like the things I spend entire days obsessing over, the deals, the quarterly numbers, the board meetings. She looks at me sometimes with this expression that essentially conveys that she has no interest in any of that, and could I please just come play with her blocks? And somehow she's right. She's 5, and she's absolutely right." It was somewhere around this point, he checked his watch and it was nearly 11, that Asher realized something. He was talking. Not the careful, strategic talking of a man who has been interviewed 500 times and knows exactly which parts of himself to offer and which to protect. Not the performed openness of someone working to make a good impression. He was just talking. The way he used to, before the money, before the company, before the version of himself that had been packaged and presented so many times, it sometimes felt like the real one. He was talking to a woman in a worn blue cardigan at a table with a white paper cloth, and the jazz was still playing softly from somewhere, and outside the rain had started to loosen its grip, and he was more present in a café at 11 o'clock on a Thursday than he'd been anywhere in longer than he could accurately name. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask," Emily said, which was not the same as saying yes, and he appreciated that. "When you saw my picture on the matchmaking profile, when you recognized me, what was your first thought?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. My first thought was that I was wrong, she said. That it was someone who looked like you, that it was too strange, too... She shook her head. Too much of a coincidence. But you came anyway. I sat with it for 3 days. She looked at him directly. I was scared. Not of you, of the conversation, of telling you. Because if I came here and told you and you didn't remember, which, to be clear, is completely understandable, I was a stranger on a bridge. She caught his expression. You really don't remember much, do you? I remember stopping the car, he said. I remember the bridge, the snow. I remember the feeling of it, the weight of it. But the details... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That's more than I expected, Emily said without accusation. You met a stranger for an hour in a snowstorm. That's not the kind of thing you'd necessarily carry around. You did. I had more reason to. She said it simply. Not as blame. Just as fact. He nodded. He didn't look away from that. Didn't deflect from the uncomfortable asymmetry of it. She had lived with that night for 7 years. He had filed it away somewhere, loosely, and moved on. There was no making that even. There was only sitting with it. If I'd remembered, he said, would that have changed what you planned to say tonight? She thought about it. I think I'd have been less prepared, she said. I had a whole thing ready for the scenario where you didn't remember. For the one where you do, a small sound that was almost a laugh. I'm kind of making it up as I go. Well, Asher Monroe had a habit, developed over years of negotiation and acquisition, of assessing the core truth of a situation, cutting through the surface material to find the fundamental shape of what was actually happening. What was happening here was not what he'd sat in the back of a car outside a café thinking might happen. He'd arrived expecting, at best, a pleasant conversation with a perfectly acceptable stranger. He'd arrived with the low-stakes pessimism of someone who has been disappointed enough to protect himself from hope. What was happening was something else. He couldn't name it cleanly, and he was suspicious of anyone who could name this kind of thing cleanly. But he could feel it. A shift in the evening's gravity, the sense that whatever this had started as, it wasn't that anymore. The woman across from him was not a highlight reel. She was not a performance or a presentation. She was someone who had picked a direction in a blizzard and kept walking for 7 years. And she had arrived at table 4 in a cafe in the rain and said the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a very long time. I'm only here because I owe you my life. He hadn't saved her. He wanted to be clear about that, at least in his own mind. He'd stopped a car and talked to a stranger for an hour in the cold. He'd told a story about being 17 and lost and deciding to move. He hadn't pulled anyone back from any edge. He hadn't been heroic or strategic or even particularly skilled. He'd been a 25-year-old who was tired and cold and saw someone alone and stopped. That was it. And somehow, that was enough. And somehow she had carried it for 7 years and built something from it, and ended up here, at this table, telling him about it with the quiet gravity of someone who has been waiting a long time to say what she needs to say. He didn't know what to do with that, but he didn't look away from it. I need to say the actual thing, Emily said. The cafe had thinned out around them. Most of the other tables were empty. The couple in the corner had gone. The man with the laptop had packed up somewhere around 10:30. It was down to them and 2 women near the front who showed no signs of leaving, and the server who kept refilling their water with the professional patience of someone being paid to be invisible. Okay, Asher said. Emily put both hands flat on the table. A deliberate gesture, grounding herself. I don't know what I expected from tonight. I told myself it was just about saying thank you, that I needed to close the loop, that I'd been carrying this thing for 7 years and I just needed to put it down. She paused. But the truth is, I also came because I was curious about who you became, the person who stopped that night, because you could have kept driving. Most people would have. And I've spent a long time wondering what kind of person stops. And now? She looked at him. The cafe light was amber and soft, and the rain had slowed to something near nothing, and he was very aware of sitting very still. Now I think you're just a person, she said, who made a good decision on a bad night, and who has been carrying around a lot of complicated things just like everyone else. A beat. Which is not what I expected. I think I'd built you up in my head into something larger. I'm not larger. I can see that. She said it without disappointment, almost with relief. You're just a person who happens to have a daughter who thinks the moon is shy. He didn't say anything. I'm glad you exist, Emily said, simply, like that was the whole of it. That's what I came to say. I'm glad you exist. And I'm glad you were on that bridge. And I'm glad you're still here. And I wanted you to know that the thing you did, the small, easy, probably forgotten thing you did, mattered more than you can know. The last of the rain was visible through the window, just the remnant of it now, drops sliding down the glass in slowing trails. Asher Monroe sat in a café at 1:45 and felt something that he was not going to name tonight because naming it felt like it would make it smaller than it was. He had $2.3 billion and a daughter who thought the moon was shy, and a company with 80 million readers, and a driver waiting outside who would lie to get him out of bad dates. And the most real thing that had happened to him in years was sitting across a small table in a worn blue cardigan, putting her hands flat on the paper tablecloth and telling him she was glad he existed. He had stopped a car on a bridge in a snowstorm 7 years ago and had not thought much of it afterward. He had filed it somewhere and moved on, the way you do, the way you have to do when your life is going very fast and the days are all pressed together and nothing has time to breathe. And now here was the shape of it. Here was what that hour had cost him. Nothing, really, nothing, and what it had done. He didn't know what to say to that. He was not sure there were the right words, so he said the only true thing he could find. I'm glad I stopped, he said. Emily Carter looked at him across the table. So am I, she said. Outside, through the cafe window, the last cloud moved off the face of something, and the amber glow of the street lamp caught something overhead. Not much, just a scrap of sky between buildings, just enough to see that the rain was done and the stars were starting to come back. Neither of them noticed yet. They were still at the table, still inside the warm, coffee-scented air of the cafe, with hours yet to go and so much left to say. The server came by at 11:15 and said, very politely, that the kitchen was closed, but they were welcome to keep their table as long as they liked. Asher said thank you and ordered 2 more coffees that neither of them needed, because it gave them a reason to stay, and neither of them had suggested leaving, and he wasn't ready to be the one who did. Emily wrapped both hands around her new cup and looked out the window at the street, which was wet and quiet now, the rain completely gone, the pavement catching the amber of the street lamps in long, broken reflections. A taxi moved through the frame and disappeared. A man walked a dog that was in no hurry. The city had gone soft at the edges the way it does late on a weeknight, when the urgency has drained out of it. You don't have to stay, she said, not looking at him. I know. I said what I came to say. You don't owe me a whole evening. I'm aware of what I owe you and what I don't. She looked at him then. There was something slightly sharp in his voice, not unkind but direct, the voice of someone who doesn't like being managed out of a room. Okay, she said. I'm staying because I want to, he said. That's all. She nodded and drank her coffee. He did the same. Outside, the dog finally got moving and the man followed. It was strange, Asher thought, how the conversation had changed shape after she'd said the things she'd come to say. Before, there had been an architecture to it, the careful scaffolding of a revelation being built toward. Now the scaffolding was down, and what was left was just 2 people at a table with nowhere particular to go. And the question was whether what they'd found under the scaffolding was enough to hold anything. So far, it seemed like it might be. Tell me about the business, he said. The consulting thing you started. She looked at him with mild suspicion, like she was checking whether it was a polite question or a real one. He kept his face open, waiting. It's small, she said. How small? 7 clients, one of whom is my friend Clara's bookshop, which I'm doing essentially at cost because I don't have it in me to charge her real money. What do you do for them? Mostly cash flow management, basic bookkeeping, some tax prep. For 2 of them, I've started doing more strategic stuff, looking at pricing models, where they're leaking money, whether their cost structure makes sense. She said it straightforwardly, without the false modesty that people sometimes perform around money talk, but also without any swagger. It's not complicated work mostly, but the people I work with, small business owners, sole proprietors, they often don't have anyone to tell them the basics. They've built something with their hands and their ideas, and then they just don't know what to do with the numbers. And you do. I understand the numbers, yes, and I understand being the person who built something from nothing and doesn't know how to talk to someone who speaks financial. She paused. I've been both of those people. How'd you get your first client? Word of mouth. Clara told someone, that someone told someone. My third client found me because she was sitting next to a woman I'd helped at a coffee shop and they got to talking. Emily almost smiled at the memory. I didn't have a website for the first 8 months. I had a Gmail address and a cell phone number and a very basic spreadsheet template. Do you have a website now? I have a website now. It's not good. He laughed. A real one, the second of the night. What's wrong with it? It was built by a client who wanted to barter services and whose actual skill set turned out to be more enthusiasm than ability. She shook her head. He was very proud of it. I didn't have the heart to tell him it looks like it was made in 2009. But it functions. It technically functions. It has my name on it and a way to contact me and a photo that makes me look like I'm testifying before Congress. She caught his expression. I'm not exaggerating. Clara said I look like I'm about to say something very serious about agricultural subsidies. This time they both laughed, and it landed in the quiet cafe like something physical, like a weight being set down. The server glanced over from the counter with the expression of someone glad to hear it. Asher looked at Emily across the table, at the ease that had moved into her face when she talked about her work, the way her hands had come off the mug and started moving slightly when she described the pricing models and the cash flow structures, the particular animation of someone who has found, through a complicated and unlikely route, the thing they're actually good at. He recognized it. He saw it in the mirror when he talked about certain deals. Not the money, never really the money, but the puzzle of it. The particular satisfaction of seeing a structure that nobody else had seen yet. You like it, he said. She caught herself. The animation dialed back slightly. I didn't always like accounting, she said carefully. I didn't say accounting. I said the work. She was quiet for a moment, then, yes, I like it, said like a small confession. I like when someone comes to me and they're scared of their own numbers, scared to look at them, scared of what they'll find. And we sit down and look at them together, and it turns out the situation is not great, usually, let's be honest. My clients are not exactly Fortune 500, but it's survivable, it's manageable, and they leave less afraid than they came in. She looked at her hands. I like that. That's not accounting, Asher said. That's something else. I know. She said it quietly. I figured that out about a year in. They sat with that for a moment. The jazz had stopped at some point, he hadn't noticed when, and now the cafe was just its own sounds. The hiss of the espresso machine being cleaned, the low conversation from the two women near the front, the occasional taxi out on the street. What do you do when a client's situation isn't survivable? He asked. She looked at him steadily. I tell them. Just like that? Not just like that. It takes time and care. But yes. Her jaw tightened slightly. I've had to tell 2 clients in the last year that the business wasn't going to make it. One of them already knew and just needed someone to say it out loud so she could stop fighting it. The other one, she stopped. Her expression shifted to something complicated. The other one did not take it well. He fired me and hired someone who told him what he wanted to hear. A beat. His business closed 4 months later. Did you feel vindicated? No, she said, quickly and with some feeling. Vindicated is the wrong word. I felt terrible. I still feel terrible. Because there was a version where he'd listened, where we'd had time to pivot or restructure, and instead, she shook her head. Vindicated? No. He noted that, filed it somewhere. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You've already told me you owe me your life, he said. I think we're past requesting permission. She absorbed that, decided it was fair. Your company, Monroe Capital. When you talk about it, In interviews, on the website, whatever. It sounds very, she searched for the word, clean, like you built it from vision and discipline and it all went the way you planned. Interviews are performances, he said. I know. So what actually happened? He looked at her for a moment. This was the thing about Emily Carter, he was realizing. She asked the questions that the people who worked for him and depended on him and needed things from him never asked, because asking required a kind of equality of position that none of them were willing to risk. She had nothing to gain from him and nothing to lose, and that made her the most honest conversation partner he'd had in a very long time. What actually happened, he said slowly, is that I made my first real money by accident. She waited. I was 23. I had a small amount of capital, inheritance from my grandmother, about $80,000, and I'd put most of it into a real estate deal that I thought was smart but was actually lucky. Timing, mostly. The market moved in a direction I'd predicted for wrong reasons, and I came out with 4 times what I put in. He turned his cup in its saucer. I told everyone I'd analyzed the market. I had a whole story, and parts of it were even true, but the honest version is that I was 23 and lucky, and I had just enough knowledge to sound credible and just enough arrogance to act on incomplete information. And then I did it again and again. And a few of those times it was actually skill. I was learning fast. I was working with people who were better than me and paying attention. But in the early years, maybe the first 3, 4, it was maybe 60% competence and 40% fortune favoring an idiot with good timing. He paused. I don't say that in public. I imagine not. The narrative is cleaner without it. He said it without apology, but also without pride. People invest in a story as much as a track record. I understood that early, so I curated the story. And the actual track record? The actual track record got good, he said. Genuinely good. I hired people smarter than me in the areas I was weak, which is harder than it sounds because it requires knowing what you don't know and being willing to say it out loud. I made bad calls. I lost money. I had a fund in year 4 that underperformed badly, and I had investors who were furious, and I had to sit in rooms and be honest about what had gone wrong. He looked at the window. That was the hardest year, not because of the money, because of what it required of me to be in those rooms and not have a clean story. What did it require? To stop being the version of myself I'd been performing and just be the one who'd made mistakes and had a plan to fix them. He looked back at her. That's the only version that works in the long run anyway. The performance version eventually collapses under its own weight. Emily nodded slowly. She was thinking about something. He could see it, the particular stillness of someone following a thought to where it leads. Is that why the dates haven't worked? She said. He blinked. What? The blind dates. Diana, your assistant, she set up a few, right? Before tonight? She caught his expression. The matchmaking service has a client intake form. It asks for context. What did the form say? That you'd had difficulty connecting with people despite multiple attempts. That you were looking for something genuine but kept finding, she seemed to be quoting from memory, interactions that felt transactional or performative. He was quiet for a moment. Diana wrote that. Is it wrong? No. He said it without pleasure. It's not wrong. So, is that it? The performance thing? That you've been showing up as the curated version and wondering why it doesn't connect? He looked at her directly. You're asking if I'm the problem. I'm asking if you've thought about it. Yes, he said. I've thought about it. And? And it's more complicated than that. The curated version is also real. It's not fake. It's just incomplete. He stopped. Tried again. When you've spent enough years being Asher Monroe, the billionaire, the brand, the Forbes cover, you stop knowing, in certain contexts, how to just be Asher, the regular one, the one who makes wrong calls and tells stories about being lucky when he should have been more careful. His voice had gone quieter. The dates failed because I showed up as the billboard version of myself, and they either wanted to be close to the billboard or were intimidated by it, neither of which is connection, Emily said. Right. She looked at him for a long moment, You're not doing that tonight, she said. He considered that. It was true, and the reason it was true was sitting across from him. Because she had arrived with something that dissolved the performance before it could set. She'd walked in with 7 years of weight, and she'd put it on the table, and there was no version of the evening after that where he could have stayed in the billboard version of himself. She hadn't done it strategically, she'd just been honest. But the effect was the same. No, he said. I'm not. She looked down at her cup. Then, for what it's worth, I prefer this version. You've only seen tonight's version? Tonight's version is the one who admitted he was lucky before he was good, and who said he's glad he stopped instead of something more impressive. She glanced up. That's enough data for a preliminary assessment. Something in him loosened a little more. He wasn't sure he had a name for what was happening at this table, and he thought maybe that was okay. Not everything needed to be named immediately. Some things needed to breathe first. Tell me about the hard part, he said, of where you are now, not the part that's working. She stilled. What do you mean? You told me about the clients, the business, Clara and the bookshop. The good stuff. He met her eyes. But nothing works cleanly. You said it yourself. You're not exactly stable. What's the hard part? She was quiet long enough that he wondered if he'd pushed too far. The cafe sounds filled the space between them. The women near the front laughing at something, the hiss of the machine, a distant siren somewhere out in the city. Money, she said finally. It's always money, which is ironic given what I do for a living. She said it with a flat humor that told him she'd made that joke before, to herself, in the dark, probably. 7 clients at the rates I charge. I'm comfortable, mostly. I'm not counting change anymore. But 1 client pulls out, 1 slow month, 1 unexpected expense. My margin is thin. Thinner than I'd like. A pause. Thinner than I can admit to the clients who look at me to have it together. Do you have savings? Some. Not enough. She said it without shame, but he could see the effort it took to say it plainly to someone who had $2.3 billion. I know what I should do. I know the theory. Applying it to your own situation is different. It's always different when it's yours, he said. You know about that? I know about the cognitive gap between knowing the right thing and doing it when you're the one with skin in the game. He paused. What's holding the growth? Capacity, mostly. I'm one person. I can't take on significantly more clients without either sacrificing quality or burning out. And I've done the second one before, and it's not... She shook her head. It's not something I'm willing to do again. So you need to either raise rates or hire. Or both, yes. She looked at him. I know. But hiring means trusting someone else with clients I've built from scratch. It means becoming something more like a manager and less like a practitioner, and I'm not sure I want that yet. She turned her cup in her hands. And raising rates means having the conversation with people I've been working with for a year or two, people who are themselves tight on money and asking for more, which feels like taking from people who don't have extra to give. Yes, said quietly, even though I know that's not how it works, even though I know I'm undercutting my own sustainability by not doing it. She looked at him with something like frustrated self-awareness. I know all of this, I just haven't done it. When did you last raise your rates? She paused. 18 months ago. How much? 12%. Inflation alone, he started. I know, she said. Not defensively, just she knew. She'd done the math, she just hadn't acted on it yet. He could have said more. There was an obvious conversation available about pricing strategy and client communication and the psychology of undervaluing your own labor. He knew that conversation well. He'd had versions of it with dozens of founders and small operators over the years. But that wasn't the conversation they were having tonight. And he had enough sense to know that being Asher Monroe, the billionaire advisor in this moment, was not what was needed. So he just said, "You'll figure it out when you're ready." She looked at him, slightly surprised, like she'd been braced for advice. "You've figured out harder things," he said. She nodded, slowly. Outside, a car rolled through the wet street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window glass and then gone. They talked for another stretch about smaller things, about the neighborhood the cafe was in, which had been changing for years in the slow, complicated way that urban neighborhoods change, and whether that was progress or loss, or both, at once. About a book Emily had been reading, a novel about a woman who keeps starting over in new cities, which she'd picked up from Clara's shop. About whether Lily had a favorite book. She did, a picture book about a bear who could only sleep when it rained, which meant on clear nights she sometimes asked Asher to make rain sounds with his mouth, which he did, badly. And she accepted this with the generous condescension of someone who understands the limitation but appreciates the effort. It was midnight when Asher's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He glanced at it. Marcus. He ignored it. It buzzed again 30 seconds later, and he ignored it again. You should probably get that, Emily said. He'll leave a voicemail. Who's he? Marcus. My driver. You told him to say the office called. He looked at her. How did you know that? Because that's what you do when you're not sure you want to stay somewhere. She said it without judgment. You build yourself an exit. He was quiet for a moment. The phone had stopped buzzing. In a few minutes it would start again. You do the same thing, he said. What? Your business, keeping it small, one person, charging less than you should, not hiring. It's an exit built in advance, a controlled environment where nothing can get too large to lose. The air between them changed by a few degrees. Not hostile, just more careful. He'd pushed on something real, and they both knew it. She looked at him without blinking. That's not a comfortable observation. No? It might also be reductive. It might, he agreed. I'm not pretending I know your psychology from 2 hours of conversation. But I recognize the instinct. I've had it. He held her gaze. The thing that survived gets protected above everything, even if protecting it too hard is what eventually limits it. Emily set her cup down. She didn't look away, but her jaw had gone slightly tight, and he could see her turning the observation over, checking it against things she already knew about herself that she hadn't said out loud tonight. That's an uncomfortable thing to say to someone, she said. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. She stopped, started again. You're probably not wrong. The admission came slowly, like moving something heavy. I know I've been careful. I know the difference between careful and stuck is getting smaller. She looked at the table. I'm working on it. I know you are. You don't know that. You met me 2 hours ago. You came here tonight, he said. That was not a careful thing to do. She looked up. He could see her working out whether that was true, testing it against her own sense of herself. No, she said finally. It wasn't. His phone buzzed a third time. He reached into his pocket and this time he answered. I'm fine, Marcus. A pause. I know. I'll text you when I'm coming out. He hung up. Emily was watching him. He actually called. He does that when he's concerned. Asher put the phone face down on the table. He has 3 grandkids and an instinct for looking after people. It's inconvenient, and I wouldn't trade it. How long has he been your driver? 4 years. He started a month after my grandmother died. He said it without planning to, and then it was out there, and he didn't take it back. I was not in a good place that month. I was working around the clock because working was the only thing that didn't feel like standing in a hole. Marcus showed up for the job, and within about a week, he'd started doing this thing where he left coffee on the back seat without being asked, at exactly the temperature I drink it. How did he know what temperature? I don't know. I've never asked. That's the thing about Marcus. He pays attention to things you don't know you're broadcasting. A pause. After she died, I didn't really talk to anyone for a long time, and Marcus never pushed. He just drove and left the coffee. And occasionally, when something was clearly wrong, he'd say one carefully chosen thing and then leave it alone. Emily's expression had shifted. Something quieter in it now, more careful. What was she like, your grandmother? He wasn't expecting the question. Most people, when he mentioned his grandmother, offered condolences and moved on. He never talked about her at any length. Stubborn, he said, which is where I got it from, according to her, though she said it about herself with pride and about me with mild exasperation. He thought about it. Something he hadn't done in a while, not with the specific texture of a real memory. She made terrible coffee and was absolutely certain it was excellent. She played cards like someone who'd been banned from casinos in a previous life. She read 3 newspapers every morning and argued with all of them. He stopped. She was the first person who told me I was smart in a way that made me believe it. Not soft or complimentary. She said it the way you'd say something was true, just factual. You're smart. Use it carefully. Emily was very still. She died while I was closing a deal, Asher said. I got the call from the hospital 2 hours after she was gone. I'd been meaning to visit that week. I kept moving it. His voice stayed even, but his jaw tightened in a way he couldn't fully control. I closed the deal. It was worth a significant amount of money, and I sat in my office at 11 o'clock at night and I thought, this is the worst trade I have ever made. The cafe was almost completely quiet now. The 2 women near the front had gone. The server was doing something behind the counter, the soft sounds of closing time prep, putting things away, quiet and unhurried. I'm sorry, Emily said. It was 6 years ago. He said it not to minimize it, but because it was true. 6 years doesn't always do much for that kind of thing. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She looked at him across the small table, and he had the feeling again, the one he'd had twice before tonight, that she was seeing something clearly, not the version he managed, the actual one. Is that when you got harder to reach? She said, after she died. He looked at her. What? You said the dates haven't worked, that things feel transactional or performative. She said it gently but without pulling the punch. I'm wondering if that started around then. He didn't answer immediately. He turned it over, the way you turn over something sharp to find where it cuts. Probably, he said. Probably that's when I decided, without deciding, without any conscious, that it was safer to be at a distance from most things. That work was reliable in a way that people weren't. A pause. And then Lily was born, and she made the theory completely impossible to maintain because she is... He stopped. Because she needs you, Emily said. Because she wants me, he said. That's different. Needing me. There are people on payroll who need me. Lily wants me. She would rather have me there specifically than anyone else. And He turned his cup. I hadn't felt that in a while. Before her. Emily didn't say anything for a moment, then quietly. She's lucky. She'd tell you the opposite on the days I get the mac and cheese ratio wrong. Emily smiled. The full one again, the uneven one that took over her whole face. And this time he didn't look away from it. He let himself look, the way you look at something you didn't expect to find and aren't sure yet what to do with. She sounds like the best thing in your life, Emily said. She is, he said, without hesitation, without the usual qualifier or hedge, just she is. By a distance that's not close. They sat with that for a while. The server came by and refilled their water without asking and withdrew again. Outside, the street was nearly empty now, just the slick pavement and the street lamps and the occasional sweep of headlights from a car passing through. Can I tell you something that's going to sound strange? Emily said. Tonight has established a high bar for strange. Fair. She looked at her water glass. For the last few years, when things were hard, the thin months, the difficult clients, the nights when I couldn't see clearly whether what I was building was actually going anywhere, I thought about that night on the bridge. She paused. Not in a dark way, more like as a fixed point, something I could orient from. She was quiet. I thought about the fact that someone stopped, that someone took an hour out of their life for a stranger who was in pain and didn't ask anything in return. And I thought, if that kind of thing can happen, if a person can be that without any reason to be, then the world is a little more... She stopped herself. I sound ridiculous. You don't. I'm using a random act of human decency as a navigational tool. That's not ridiculous. That's practical. He said it with enough certainty that she looked at him. You had a true thing. You used it to orient by. That's not mystical. That's just how people work when they're paying attention. She held his gaze. You've thought about this kind of thing. My grandmother used to say that what you choose to remember is as important as what actually happened. He paused. She was right about more things than I gave her credit for at the time. Emily nodded, slow, and looked back at her glass. Something in her posture had changed. Not relaxed exactly, but settled, like a boat that's finally found a depth where it can anchor. I almost didn't send in the request, she said, to the matchmaking service when I recognized your photo. What made you do it? She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he didn't rush her. Clara, she said. I showed Clara the photo. I told her the whole story. The bridge, the snow, looking for you for years, and she sat with it for a while. And then she said, the worst thing that happens is he doesn't remember and you walk away with your thank you said. Another pause. She also said if I didn't do it, I'd spend the next decade wondering what would have happened if I had. Clara is annoyingly good at the right argument. She sounds like someone worth keeping close. She's the reason I have 3 of my clients. Emily's mouth curved. She's also the reason I have a copy of every novel published in 1987, because she's been quietly moving her overstock onto my shelves for 2 years, and I keep pretending not to notice. You notice. Of course I notice. But she knows I won't say anything, and I know she's doing it because she worries about me having a life outside of spreadsheets. She shook her head fondly. We have a whole silent agreement built on books I didn't choose. It was 12:30 when the server came over with the quiet authority of someone who had been patient long enough and said that they were about to close up for the night. He said it apologetically, like he felt bad about the interruption. And Asher said it was fine and asked for the check, and the server said it had already been handled, which surprised Asher, who was used to being the one who handled things. He looked at Emily. She was putting on her scarf, looping it twice the way she'd had it when she walked in, and she caught his look and shrugged with one shoulder. You stayed, she said simply. It was the least I could do. Emily. Don't argue about it. You'll lose. He didn't argue about it. She was probably right. They put on their coats in the quiet of the nearly closed café, and the server held the door with a nod, and they stepped out into the night air, which had gone cold and clean the way October air does after rain. That particular sharpness that feels like a new version of the world. The street was wet and empty, and the street lamps made everything glow amber, and the stars were there. Not many, the city too bright for many, but enough. Between the buildings, between the gaps. They stood on the sidewalk outside Brentwood grounds, and Asher could see Marcus down the block in the black car, the glow of his phone screen faintly visible through the windshield. So, Emily said. So, he said. She looked up at the sky. Just briefly, just a habit, the way people look up sometimes without really meaning to, then back at him. Thank you for staying, she said. I know it wasn't what you planned for tonight. I didn't have a plan. That was the plan. The no-plan plan. It's been working pretty well so far. She looked at him for a moment with the particular expression he'd been learning over the last 3 hours. The one that meant she was deciding how honest to be. This wasn't what I planned either, she said. I planned to say what I came to say and leave. I had a cab number ready. What changed? She considered that. You asked what actually happened, she said. After I said I recognized you, you didn't just receive the gratitude and nod and ask for something to eat. You asked what actually happened. She paused. I hadn't expected that. He thought about that for a moment. The sound of a distant siren moved through the city and faded. The amber light pooled in the puddles on the pavement. I want to see you again, he said. It came out more simply than he'd planned, which was fine because it was true and didn't need decoration. Emily looked at him. A long look. Not calculating, just real, the kind of look that takes stock without performing the taking of stock. That's complicated, she said. I know. She gestured vaguely, which he understood to encompass the car and Marcus and the implied weight of $2.3 billion and everything else. I know what I am, he said, and tonight I've also been the person who got the mac and cheese ratio wrong and is still proud of a lucky real estate deal he had at 23. He held her gaze. You've met both versions. You can make an informed decision. She almost smiled. Almost. I'll think about it, she said. That's an honest answer. I'm not in the habit of dishonest ones. I noticed. A beat of cold night air moved between them. She pulled her scarf a little higher. Down the block, Marcus would be patient for another 20 minutes and then find a reason to walk past the window again, and Asher found he didn't mind. "Good night, Asher Monroe," Emily said. "Good night, Emily Carter." She turned and walked toward the corner. He watched her go, not dramatically, not with the weight of a romantic movie moment, just with the simple attention of someone watching someone they don't want to lose sight of yet. She walked the way she'd done everything tonight, without performance, without looking back to see if she was being watched. She turned the corner and was gone. Asher stood on the wet sidewalk for another moment, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the empty corner. The city hummed its quiet, late-night hum around him. The puddles glowed. He thought about a bridge in a snowstorm 7 years ago. He thought about a girl in a talking wolf show with the volume too loud. He thought about coffee at exactly the right temperature, left without asking. He thought about the way an uneven smile can take over a whole face. He turned and walked back toward the car. Marcus would want to know if there was somewhere else they needed to be. There wasn't. Not tonight. Tonight, the only place he needed to be was home, where Lily had almost certainly fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him with the wolf show still running on the screen. He had $2.3 billion and a driver with 3 grandkids and a picture of his grandmother in his wallet that he hadn't looked at in longer than he should admit. And something had shifted tonight, some tight structural thing in the center of him, and he wasn't ready yet to look at it directly. But he could feel it. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. He didn't call the next day. He'd thought about it. The phone was in his hand twice, Emily Carter's number in his contacts under a name Diana had added, with the quiet efficiency of someone who anticipated things before being asked. He'd opened the contact, looked at the number, and put the phone face down on his desk both times. It wasn't hesitation in the way people usually meant it. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something closer to the instinct you get when you're holding something fragile, the deliberate slowness of not wanting to be the reason it breaks. 3 days went by. He worked. He took Lily to her Saturday morning art class, the one at the community center where a retired teacher named Mr. Okafor let 5-year-olds make abstract paintings and called everything they produced powerful, which Lily accepted as her due. He watched her slap cobalt blue paint across a canvas with the focused authority of someone who had a vision. She came home with blue on her nose and a painting she said was The Moon Being Nervous, which she wanted to hang in his office because, she explained, his office needed something alive in it. He hung it that Monday. It was the first thing on his walls that hadn't been chosen by an interior designer. On the 4th day, Emily texted first. It was 10:40 in the morning. He was in a meeting, quarterly review, 8 people around the conference table, a presentation about a portfolio company that was underperforming in ways that were becoming harder to explain away. His phone was face down by habit. He checked it when the meeting broke for coffee, and there it was. "I've been thinking about what you said, about protecting what survived. I think you were right, and I also think it was a rude thing to say to someone you'd just met. Both things are true." He read it twice, smiled, a real one, the kind that doesn't have an audience. He typed back, "I tend to say the thing I'm thinking. It's been called a flaw. 3 minutes. It might be." It's also how the conversation stayed honest. He stood in the hallway outside the conference room with his coffee cooling in his hand and typed, "Are you free Thursday evening?" A longer pause this time, long enough that he went back into the conference room and sat through 15 minutes of spreadsheet analysis before his phone moved on the table. "Yes. But not a cafe this time. I do better in places where I'm less likely to make a scene." "You didn't make a scene." I had tears in my eyes in the first 30 seconds. That's a scene. It was a very quiet scene. Nobody noticed. You noticed. He set the phone down. Across the table, his CFO was explaining leverage ratios in a voice that suggested he found them deeply interesting. Asher nodded at the right moments and thought about Thursday. They met at a restaurant called Halcyon. Not his usual kind of place, not expense account impressive, but a small Italian spot in the west side of the city that Marcus had mentioned once, years ago, as the kind of place where the food was serious and nobody cared who you were. Checked tablecloths, wine and juice glasses because the owner didn't believe in stemware, a chalkboard menu that changed depending on what had come in that morning. Emily arrived in a dark green dress and the same winter sky scarf from the café, wound differently this time, once instead of twice, and her hair was down rather than pushed back, which she'd clearly done deliberately and then second-guessed, because when she sat down, she immediately tucked a piece of it behind her ear in the way of someone who'd almost put it back up on the way over. "You look," Asher started. "Don't," she said, sitting down. "I spent 40 minutes deciding what to wear, and I'm still not sure about it, so don't make it a thing." "I was going to say you look like yourself." She paused, looked at him across the checked tablecloth. "That's either a very good compliment or an insult." "It's a compliment. You looked like yourself at the cafe too. It's notable." She seemed to decide to accept that and picked up the chalkboard menu. "Clara said to tell you hello, by the way." "Clara doesn't know me." "Clara knows the story. She's emotionally invested." Emily scanned the menu. She also said, and I'm quoting, "If he turns out to be actually decent, you have to stop charging her bookkeeping rates." "How much are you charging her?" "A number that is not your business." "Meaning very little." "Meaning it's between me and Clara." He smiled and looked at his own menu. It listed 6 things, described simply: a pasta with braised rabbit, a fish dish that named the boat it had come from, 2 vegetable preparations, and a soup. Nothing that needed explanation or performance. He liked it immediately. "How's Lily?" Emily asked. The question was so direct, so natural, that it caught him slightly off guard. The specific ease of it, asking about the actual important thing rather than working up to it through polite preliminaries. "She told me this morning that her teacher is wrong about dolphins," he said. "About what specifically?" "About whether they have feelings. Lily has determined that they absolutely do, based on a documentary she watched with Elena, and also on the fact that one dolphin she saw in a video looked sad around the eyes." He paused. "She's planning to write a letter." "To who?" "She hasn't settled on a recipient yet. Currently the candidates are the school, the documentary company, and the people who are in charge of dolphins." Emily laughed. The full version, unguarded. "She's 5? She'll be 6 in February. The letter-writing phase started at 4 and has not slowed." "Has she ever sent one?" 2. One to a neighbor whose dog kept digging under our fence. She wrote, "Your dog is sad and wants to come over. Please let him visit," and left it in the mailbox. He set down the menu. The neighbor started a standing Saturday play date. "And the second?" To the company that makes her favorite cereal, telling them the prize in the box was not exciting enough for the price. He picked up his water glass. "She received a coupon for a free box and a handwritten note from a customer service rep that said they'd passed her feedback to the product team. She keeps the note on her nightstand." Emily looked at him with an expression that was, he couldn't quite name it, something between warmth and something more careful, the look of someone weighing a feeling against their better judgment. "You love talking about her," Emily said. "Yes." "You don't do that thing some parents do where they're apologetic about it. 'Sorry, I'm going on about my kid.'" "I'm not sorry about it. She's the most interesting person I know." "Does she know that?" He thought about it honestly. "I'm not sure. I should probably say it more explicitly." "You should," Emily said. Simply. Like a fact. Not a criticism. The waiter came, a young man with the unhurried energy of someone who understood that good food required actual time, and they ordered. Emily asked 2 real questions about the pasta, which the waiter answered with the seriousness they deserved, and ordered the rabbit. Asher ordered the fish. They chose a wine without deliberation, the second one on a short list, and it arrived in juice glasses, red and dark. Emily raised hers. To blind dates that don't go the way anyone expected. He raised his. To someone who had the guts to walk through the door. She held the toast for a second, then drank. Her expression when she lowered the glass was complicated in a way she didn't bother to hide. "Can I tell you what I was afraid of?" she said. "Yes." "Coming here tonight." She turned the juice glass in her hands. "Not the restaurant. I mean, pursuing this. Agreeing to see you again." "What were you afraid of?" "That I'd built you into something." She said it straight, looking at him. 7 years is a long time to carry something. You get accustomed to the shape of it, and the shape I'd built was... She paused. Not a fantasy exactly, more like an archetype. The person who stopped. The moment that changed things. And if I came back and you were real, which you are, obviously, then the thing I'd been orienting by wasn't quite the same thing anymore. Does that change it? For the worse? She thought about it without rushing. No, she said. It changes it into something more useful. But it also means letting go of the version I'd been carrying, and that's... She stopped. Harder than it sounds. Yes. She set down the glass. The version I carried didn't have a daughter who writes letters about dolphin feelings. It didn't have a CFO and a driver and a grandmother he didn't get to say goodbye to. It was just the hand on the bridge railing, the voice in the snow. She looked at him. Easier to navigate by, in some ways, because it was simple. And the real version? The real version is a person. She said it like it resolved something, which is harder and also more. They ate when the food came, and it was good. The rabbit tender and dark, the pasta hand-cut, the kind of cooking that tasted like someone had paid attention at every step. Emily ate like someone who was actually hungry and not managing an impression, which he registered as a specific relief. He'd sat across from too many dinners where the food went mostly untouched because eating was a performance risk. She told him about her week. A new client had come through Clara. A florist, 3 years in business, decent revenue but a pricing structure that was costing her significantly more than she realized. Emily had spent 2 days with her spreadsheets before their first meeting. By the time I sat down with her, she said, I could see 3 things she was doing that were quietly bleeding her. The worst one was that she was pricing her arrangements based on material costs plus a markup, but she wasn't accounting for labor time realistically. She'd just never done the math on what an hour of her own time was worth. What happened when you showed her? She cried. Emily said it matter-of-factly. Which happens more than you'd think. Not from sadness, from the specific feeling of seeing clearly something you'd been avoiding seeing. She picked up her fork. She raised her prices 2 weeks later, lost 2 clients who'd been taking advantage of the low rates, kept everyone else. And she's okay with losing the 2? Better than okay. She said it was the first time she'd made a business decision that felt like it respected her own work. Emily paused. That's the thing I like about this kind of work. It's not about the numbers. It's about people understanding their own value clearly enough to act on it. Asher looked at her across the checked tablecloth. You know what I notice when you talk about your work, he said. What? You don't hedge. When you're talking about something you understand, you're completely direct. No qualifiers, no I might be wrong or just my opinion. He paused. But the second you're talking about yourself as a business, your own rates, your own structure, the hedging comes back. She pointed her fork at him. You're doing it again. Saying the thing I'm thinking? Making uncomfortable observations. Is it wrong? She lowered the fork, ate a bite, chewed, set down her fork. No, she said. It's not wrong. She looked at the table. I'm better at seeing other people's value clearly than my own. She almost said something and stopped. What? That's something I'm working on. She met his eyes. Actively. Not just saying, I actually have a therapist and we talk about it specifically. He nodded. No performance of being impressed, no overreaction, just received. Is that a surprise? She asked. No, it seems consistent with who you are. Some people find it off-putting, the mention of therapy. Those people are usually the ones who need it most. She almost smiled. That's a very sweeping statement. Probably. He picked up his wine. My grandmother went to therapy for 11 years. She considered it as routine as a physical. Was she the one who... Emily stopped, reconsidered. I don't want to pry. You're not prying. Ask. Was she the reason you became who you became, professionally? He thought about that with real honesty. She was the reason I believed it was possible, he said. My parents were fine, functional, not particularly present. My father worked, my mother organized her life around his work, and the whole household ran on a logic that never quite included me as a variable that mattered. He paused. She was my grandmother on my mother's side, my grandmother Esther. She was the one who saw me. What did she see? I don't know exactly. She never explained it that way. She just included me, asked my opinion on things before I had opinions worth asking about, argued with me when I was wrong, which I often was, and didn't let me get away with lazy thinking. He turned the juice glass. She died 6 years ago. The company was already doing well by then. She'd seen enough of it to know it was real. He stopped. She never called it impressive. She called it a good use. A good use, Emily repeated, as in a good use of what you've got. He paused, which was both affirming and a slight warning, I think, because the implication was that it could also be a bad use. The waiter cleared their plates. Emily ordered coffee. Asher did the same. Outside the restaurant's front window, the street moved with the easy traffic of a Thursday evening, people walking in pairs and small groups, the city doing its unremarkable nightly business. Can I tell you what I've been thinking about? Asher said. Since when? Since last Thursday, the café. She met his eyes and nodded. I've been thinking about what you said, about using that night as a fixed point, something to navigate by. He paused. And I've been thinking about the fact that I didn't remember it. Not specifically. Not your face, not what we said. He set down his glass. And I've been trying to figure out how to feel about that. You don't need to feel a particular way about it. I know, but I do anyway. He held her gaze. I've spent 6 days thinking about what else I might have let pass without holding on to it. What other moments I drove through without stopping. You can't know that. No, but I can feel the weight of the possibility. He said it without drama, just honest. I run a company. I have people who work for me, 80 employees directly, hundreds more through portfolio companies. And I know them professionally. I know their value to the organization. I know their performance metrics. He paused. I don't know if most of them are okay. Emily looked at him steadily. My grandmother used to say that's the most important question, and nobody asks it enough, he said. She meant it broadly. Are you okay? Not as a greeting, as an actual question. He paused. I forgot that. Somewhere in the last decade, I forgot to ask it. Are you asking yourself, Emily said, or just everyone else? He looked at her. Both. Starting now. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she said, Okay then. The coffee came. They drank it slowly without the urgency of needing to be anywhere. The restaurant had filled around them. A large family in the back celebrating something, the low roar of their conversation a comfortable counterpoint to the quiet at their table. And then began to thin as the evening moved toward 10 o'clock. I want to tell you something, Emily said. She'd been building to it. He could tell the same way he could tell in the café, that particular quality of someone holding a thing carefully until the right moment to set it down. Okay, he said. The night on the bridge. I've never told anyone the full version. Not my therapist, not Clara. They know the shape of it, the outline, but not the specific. She looked at her coffee cup. Tonight's the first time I've told anyone about the actual sequence. What happened before you stopped? What happened after you left? She looked up. I don't know why it was you. I've been thinking about that. Why the person I could finally tell it to clearly was you, specifically. Maybe because I was there, he said. Maybe, she paused. Or maybe because you already know the part I'm most ashamed of. He frowned. Which part? That I didn't make some heroic decision that night. Her voice stayed steady, but something underneath it tightened. I've let people believe that. Not explicitly. I've never said it. But I let the implication stand. That there was a moment of clarity, a decision, a turning point. When the truth is I got off the bridge because I was cold. She looked at him. There's no redemptive narrative in that. I just got cold and moved. Emily, let me finish. She looked down. For years I thought that made it smaller, the story. Made it less meaningful, because it wasn't a decision. It was just biology. My body doing what bodies do when they're freezing. She was quiet for a second. But then I started to think that maybe the decision wasn't on the bridge. Maybe the decision was the next morning when I picked up the phone. and the decision after that, and after that. She looked up. Maybe it was never one decision. Maybe it was just one direction, kept at, over a very long time. Asher thought of a 17-year-old lost in a blizzard, of telling a stranger on a bridge to pick a direction and walk, of not knowing then that anyone had ever actually used that story for anything. "I told you about a blizzard," he said. "You did." "I told it to keep you talking. I didn't—" He stopped, thought about how to be accurate. "I wasn't sure it was good advice. I didn't know if it applied to anything other than being literally lost in snow." "It applied," she said. "I know that now." His voice was quieter than usual. "I've known it for a week." They sat with that for a moment. The family in the back laughed at something, a big collective sound, the kind that only happens when a lot of people who love each other are in the same room, and then it settled back to their low conversation. "I need to tell you something else," Emily said. "Okay." "I looked you up." She said it plainly, no apology, but also no pretense. "After the café, not obsessively, but enough. I read some interviews. I looked at the company website. I read a profile in a business magazine from 3 years ago." She paused. "I wanted to know who you'd become, not just who you were at the table." "And?" "And the magazine profile made you sound like a machine," she said. "Very impressive, very precise. No corners, no texture." She looked at him. "The man at the table last week had corners. The profile was from 3 years ago. I was managing a particular narrative that year." "What happened 3 years ago?" He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "The company had a difficult period. Not publicly. We contained it. But internally, it was the worst stretch I'd been through since the early fund that underperformed." He paused. "A partnership I'd built over 5 years collapsed badly. A man I trusted with significant capital turned out to have been managing his own books in ways that were not," he chose the word carefully, "honest. He defrauded you. He was creative with the definition of our agreement, in a way that cost us and him significantly, and ended with lawyers and a settlement that had strict confidentiality provisions." He said it evenly. "I lost about $40 million of the fund's capital, which I made back over the next 18 months with work. But what I didn't make back was the specific feeling of having trusted someone that completely and been wrong. That's not money. No, that's something else." His jaw tightened briefly. "I thought I was a good judge of people. I'd built the company on that assumption, that I could read a room, read a person, understand what they were actually telling me underneath what they were saying." He paused. "After that, I stopped trusting the read." Emily was very still across the table, listening in the way she listened, fully, without preparing her response. "That's when the date started?" she said. He looked at her. "What?" "Diana said you'd had difficulty connecting, the intake form." She paused. "Was that the year?" He thought about the timeline. Marcus had been hired the month after his grandmother died, which was 6 years ago. The bad partnership was 3 years ago. The dates had started, Diana had finally said something, about 2.5 years ago. The math was uncomfortable. "Yes," he said. "Probably. Because you stopped trusting your own read of people. Because I didn't know anymore if what I was seeing was real." He said it quietly. "If I'd missed it so completely with someone I'd worked with for 5 years, how was I supposed to trust what I saw in anyone?" Emily set her coffee cup down carefully. He could see her working through something, the particular furrow between her eyebrows that appeared when she was thinking rather than performing. "Can I push back on something?" she said. "Yes." "You didn't miss it because your read was broken," she said. "You missed it because that person was deliberately hiding something. Those aren't the same failure." She held his gaze. "Frauds work because they're skilled at being hidden. That's not your blindness. That's their craft." He was quiet. "Your read of me was right," she said, "at the café. Tonight. The uncomfortable things you said were accurate. The thing you said about protecting what survived, accurate. The thing about hedging when I talk about my own value, accurate." She paused. "Your read isn't broken. You just stopped trusting it after someone showed you it could be misled. The restaurant had gone quieter. The family in the back was wrapping up. The sounds of coats being pulled on, chairs scraped back, children lifted. Outside, the Thursday city was settling toward late. "You're very direct," he said. "You said that at the café." "I'm saying it again. It's still notable." "Is it uncomfortable?" "No." He said it honestly. "It's the opposite of uncomfortable. It's—" He tried to find the right word. "Restful," which is a strange word for it, but I spend most of my days in conversations where everyone is managing something, their position, their access, their impression. Nobody says the thing they're actually thinking. He looked at her. "You say the thing. It's gotten me into trouble. I believe it. Clara says I have no filter." Clara sounds right. Clara is usually right. She looked at him with that careful taking stock expression. "Can I ask you something that might sound odd? After this conversation, my bar for odd is very high. Why do you think you stopped that night? On the bridge. You were 25. You were in the middle of building something enormous. You were driving yourself home in a snowstorm." She paused. Most people would have convinced themselves they'd imagined it, or that it wasn't their business, or that they'd call someone else's number. She looked at him directly. "Why did you stop?" He had never been asked that question. He had barely asked it of himself. He sat with it now, honestly, resisting the urge to give an answer that was cleaner than the truth. "I saw someone alone," he said, "on a bridge, in a storm, and something in me just wouldn't drive past." He paused. "I don't know how to make that more profound than it is. It wasn't a decision I deliberated over. It was just I couldn't keep going." "That's who you are," Emily said, quietly, like a statement of fact. "Sometimes. More often than you let yourself credit." He looked at her. "You don't have enough data for that conclusion." "Lily's painting in your office," she said. He blinked. "I didn't tell you about that." "You said she told you your office needed something alive in it, and the way you said it," she tilted her head slightly, "you hung it. You're guessing." "I'm reading the room." A pause. "How'd I do?" He said nothing for a moment. Then, "It's in the center of the wall behind my desk." She wanted it where I'd see it without having to turn around. Emily nodded, once, like a bet that had come in. "You stop for people," she said. "That's who you are. You've just spent the last few years convincing yourself it's a liability." He didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure he needed one. Some things were better received than responded to, and this was one of them. Something she'd set down on the table between them, and he could either pick it up or leave it, and leaving it felt wrong. He picked it up. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "This week, the week since the cafe, I've been trying to think of the last time I had a conversation that felt like the one we had last Thursday." He paused. "I couldn't find one. Not clearly. Not recently." He looked at her across the table. "You walked in and said you owed me your life, and for most of the rest of the evening, I forgot to be Asher Monroe the brand. I was just—" He stopped. "Just Asher," she said. "Just Asher." He let that sit. That hasn't happened in a long time. Emily looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant had gone quiet around them. The busboy moved through the empty tables. The candle between them had burned low. "I know who you are now," she said. "Not the profile, not the headline. You." A pause. "And I'm still here. That means something to me." "Good." She said it simply, without flourish. "It's meant to." He looked at her across the candle in the quiet restaurant and thought about a bridge in a snowstorm and a knock-on effect 7 years long and a woman who'd carried something across all of it and arrived at a cafe on a rainy Thursday and sat down and said the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. He thought about how the version of himself that had driven past that bridge, the version he could so easily have been, the version that would have kept going and told himself it wasn't his business, had no idea what he would have missed. Not just her. Everything she carried and built and fought for. Everything she'd shown him tonight and at the cafe about what honest conversation felt like, what it cost, what it gave back. Every letter Lily would never have inspired in someone who had never stopped on a bridge and never met the woman who remembered it. The full reach of a thing. How long its ripples run. He reached across the table and picked up the check before Emily could. She made a sound that was the beginning of an objection. "Don't," he said. "It's not your... You paid last time." "I had a coupon." He looked at her. "You did not have a coupon." She almost smiled. It felt more equitable to say coupon. "I'm paying," he said. "You can argue about it over coffee next week." The invitation landed in the space between them, casual and specific, and she looked at him with the expression she got when she was deciding how honest to be. "Next week," she said. Not a question exactly. More like she was testing the weight of it. "Or the week after, or whenever you're ready." He held her gaze. "I'm not in a hurry, but I'm also not going to pretend I'm not interested." She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The candle between them gave a small, tired flutter. "Next week," she said. He nodded, put the card in the check holder. Didn't make it a moment, because she wouldn't want it to be a moment, and he was starting to understand the specific texture of what Emily Carter wanted and didn't want. They left the restaurant into a night that had gone clear and cold, the city sharp-edged in the way of late October evenings when the air has finally dried out. Their breath showed in small clouds. The street was quiet. Marcus was down the block, which Emily noticed without Asher having to say anything. "He's loyal," she said. "Extraordinarily." She looked at him sideways. "Does he know about the café last week?" "He knows I wasn't inside for an hour." "How long were we in there?" 3 hours and 40 minutes. She absorbed that. "He didn't say anything?" "He said, 'Good night, Mr. Monroe,' and drove me home." Asher paused. "Which is Marcus's way of saying a great deal." She smiled, the uneven one, the real one, and looked down the empty street toward the corner. The same corner she'd turned last week, the one he'd watched her disappear around. "Good night, Asher," she said. "Good night." She started walking, 2 steps, 3. Then she stopped and turned back, which she hadn't done last week, which he noted. "The moon," she said. He frowned. "What?" "Lily said the moon was shy." She gestured up, and there it was, overhead, 3/4 full and bright against the clear city sky, doing its unhurried business between 2 towers. "I've been thinking about that all week." She looked back at him. She might be right. She turned and walked to the corner, and this time he watched her the whole way, until she turned and stood on the sidewalk for a moment after she was gone, looking at the space where she'd been. He looked up. The moon was where she'd pointed, between the buildings, pale and steady, giving nothing away. He thought, maybe. He walked back to the car. Marcus didn't say anything. He drove, and Asher sat in the back with the city moving past the windows, and thought about a woman who carried 7 years like a compass and still walked forward, and a girl who could look at the moon and find a feeling in it nobody else had thought to look for. He thought about what his grandmother would have said if she'd been alive to hear any of this. He thought she'd have said something characteristically unhelpful and completely accurate in the way she had. Something like, well, pay attention then. He planned to. The thing about slowly letting someone in is that you don't always notice it's happening until it already has. November arrived the way it does in the city, not with a single cold day, but with a gradual withdrawal of warmth, degree by degree, until one morning you reach for a heavier coat without thinking, and realize summer has been gone for a while, and you simply hadn't marked the moment. Asher noticed this on a Tuesday, standing on the building's entrance steps while Marcus brought the car around. And he noticed it the way he noticed most things that weren't business, too late, and with a quality of catching up. He and Emily had seen each other 4 times since Halcyon. There was a Sunday afternoon walk through the market district that hadn't been planned. She'd texted that she was near the Monroe Capitol building running an errand, and he'd been in the office on a weekend again, the particular transgression he kept meaning to stop committing. And he'd said I'll come down, and they'd spent 2 hours in the open-air market buying nothing in particular and talking about everything in the way that's only possible when there's no table between you and you're both moving and the conversation doesn't have to hold still. She had strong opinions about street food. He filed this away as a fact that pleased him disproportionately. There was a Wednesday evening at Clara's bookshop. Emily had mentioned an event, a local author talking about something to do with urban history, and Asher had asked if guests were welcome, and Emily had said it's a public event. Anyone can come, in the tone of someone who knew perfectly well that wasn't quite what he was asking, but chose to answer the literal question. He'd come anyway, and Clara had looked at him for a long, assessing moment when Emily introduced them and then said, "The coffee's terrible, help yourself," which he understood to be an acceptance of some kind. The author had been interesting. Clara had opinions about everything the author said and expressed them freely from her position behind the counter. Asher had liked her immediately, the way you like people who have no interest in impressing you. On the way out, walking down the bookshop's narrow front steps into the cold, Emily had said, "She likes you." And he'd said, "She called my tie ambitious." And Emily had said, "That's a compliment from Clara. It means it made a decision." And then they'd stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than the situation required, in the specific way that had become a pattern between them. The reluctance at the end of an evening to be the one who moves first. He'd moved first that night. He'd said goodnight and walked to the car. In the rearview mirror, he could see her still on the bookshop steps, watching the car go, and he'd thought about the first night at the café, standing outside, watching her turn the corner, that same quality of not wanting to lose sight of something. There was a Thursday lunch, her suggestion, which felt meaningful since she'd been precise in the early weeks about not being the one to initiate. A sandwich place near her office, which was 2 rooms in a shared workspace building with a coffee station in the hall and a view of the alley below. She'd shown him the office without apology. The desk was organized in the particular way of someone who has a system that works for them and doesn't care whether it looks organized from the outside. Stacks that meant something, color-coded folders, a cork board with index cards and string connecting things in patterns that only made complete sense to her. "It looks like a conspiracy board," he said. "It's a cash flow visualization system." "For which client?" "All of them currently." She looked at it. "It helps me see the relationships between problems. If I can see them spatially, I can—" She stopped. "It sounds unhinged when I explain it out loud. It sounds like how I used to work when I was starting out." He'd looked at it more carefully. "Before I hired people to build software that did this." "I've seen the software. It's not better." "No," he'd said honestly. "It's just more expensive." She'd laughed, and they'd eaten sandwiches at the edge of her desk, and he'd looked at the index cards and the string and thought about the florist whose pricing she'd fixed, and the bookshop she charged almost nothing, and the 7 clients she carried with the specific devotion of someone who takes on only what they can do well. And then there was last Saturday, which was the one that mattered, the one he'd been thinking about all week in the way of something that has shifted the ground slightly and you're still figuring out where everything has landed. It had started simply enough. Emily had mentioned in passing the week before that she was helping Clara apply for a small business development grant, an application process that was, in her words, designed by someone who has never met a small business owner in their life, with sections that contradict each other and a word limit that makes it impossible to actually explain anything. She'd been working on it in her evenings, on top of her regular client load, unpaid, and she'd said it the way she said most things about Clara. As a simple fact, no martyrdom in it. He'd offered, without entirely planning to have Diana look at it. Diana had a background in nonprofit and public sector writing that predated her time at Monroe Capital, and she had a specific talent for the kind of language that made bureaucratic applications work. Emily had said she'd think about it. 3 days later, she'd texted, "If the offer still stands, I'll take it. But I'm telling Clara it was my idea." "Understood," he'd texted back. "Diana will reach out." What he hadn't anticipated was that Diana would suggest they all meet in person. Diana's idea of efficient being a working session rather than an exchange of documents. And that working session would happen at his house, specifically because Diana's office was being repainted and the Monroe Capital conference rooms were booked solid that Saturday, and it would be the first time Emily came to where he actually lived. He'd mentioned this to Lily on Friday night, trying to gauge her reaction, which was usually more reliable than any adult he knew for reading a situation accurately. "Is she your friend?" Lily had asked. "Yes," he'd said. like a work friend or a real friend. What's the difference? Lily had considered this with the seriousness of someone refining a philosophical framework. Work friends are nice at work, she'd said. Real friends come over. Then a real friend. Lily had nodded, satisfied, and returned to her wolf show. Then, 30 seconds later, without looking away from the screen, is she going to be there when I wake up? She's coming in the morning to do some work with Diana. You'll probably see her. Another 30-second pause. Does she like wolves? I don't know. You should find out, Lily had said, with the tone of someone pointing out an obvious gap in preparation. Emily had arrived at 9:15 on Saturday morning, 10 minutes after Diana, carrying a canvas tote that was too heavy, still that same habit, and wearing jeans and a gray sweater and her hair up in the practical way she wore it when she was working. She'd stood in the entrance hall and looked at the space with the honest curiosity of someone who's decided not to manage their reactions, and he'd seen her take in the height of the ceilings and the general scale of it, and then visibly decline to comment, which told him everything about what she was thinking. Coffee? He said. Please, she said. Strong. He led her through to the kitchen, where Diana was already at the long table with the grant application spread across her end in the organized chaos of someone who processes paper better than screens. Diana looked up, assessed Emily in 4 seconds the way Diana assessed everyone, and said, Good. You brought the original draft? In the tote, Emily said, and just like that they were working. Asher made coffee and stayed mostly out of it, because it was their work, and he was smart enough to know when to leave a room. He took his coffee to his office, where Lily's moon painting was on the wall behind the desk, exactly where Lily had decreed it, and dealt with his own weekend backlog, the emails that accumulated from Friday afternoon to Saturday morning with the reproductive enthusiasm of something left in a warm place. He'd been at it for about an hour when he heard, from the direction of the kitchen, a sound that stopped him cold. Lily's voice. He hadn't heard her come downstairs. Elena had Saturdays off, and Lily's weekend habit was to sleep until 8:30 and then appear in the kitchen demanding cereal with the specific ratio, which she made herself now with the focused competence of someone who had decided this was important enough to master. He'd assumed she'd done exactly that. He hadn't thought about the fact that Diana was at the kitchen table, and Emily was at the kitchen table, and Lily would simply arrive. He heard Diana's warm, familiar greeting. He heard Lily's voice, which had the particular morning quality of being slightly rougher and less filtered than her afternoon voice, ask something he couldn't quite make out. He waited, listening, with the specific anxiety of a parent who knows their child is unpredictable and honest, and sometimes both at once. He heard Emily's voice, low, even, unperformed. Then he heard Lily laugh. He put down his coffee. He sat still for a moment. Then he got up and walked toward the kitchen. Lily was sitting on the counter beside the refrigerator. Her preferred perch, one he'd told her 40 times was for sitting on, not for, and had given up policing, with a bowl of cereal balanced on her knees, wearing the pajamas with the small foxes on them. She was looking at Emily with the undivided attention that she usually reserved for the wolf show, and things she found genuinely interesting. Emily was at the table with Diana, but she'd turned in her chair to face Lily, and she had the same attention directed back, not the performed attention of an adult humoring a child, but the real kind, the kind that Lily, at 5, almost 6, could reliably detect and immediately rewarded with her actual self. And then he says the moon is made of cheese, Lily was saying, in the tone of someone recounting an obvious falsehood. But that's because he didn't look carefully enough. What do you think it's made of? Emily asked. Lily considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Ice, she said. Very old ice. That got confused and started glowing. I've never thought of it that way, Emily said. But I think you might be onto something. Lily looked at her. This was the crucial moment. Asher knew this look, the one where Lily was deciding whether you meant it or were just being nice. Adults were usually only partially successful at this test. You're not just saying that, Lily said. I'm not just saying it, Emily said. Ice that forgot it was cold and started glowing instead. That's actually a better description than what I learned in school. Lily appeared to accept this. She ate a spoonful of cereal. My dad says you do math for people, she said. I help people understand their numbers, Emily said. That's math. Mostly, yes. I'm not good at math, Lily said, without distress. Simply reportage. What are you good at? Lily thought about this. Letters, she said, and painting, and knowing when something is wrong. That last one is very useful, Emily said. That's what my teacher says. Lily ate another spoonful. Are you and my dad friends? The question landed with the directness that only 5-year-olds achieve without embarrassment. Asher, standing in the kitchen doorway that he was now deeply committed to staying out of, watched Emily absorb it. We're becoming friends, Emily said. An honest answer. Not too much, not too little. Exactly calibrated, which told him she'd thought about how to answer this kind of question from a child, which told him something else entirely. Lily nodded. He needs more friends, she said, returning to her cereal. He mostly talks to Diana and Marcus and people from work. Lily, Asher said from the doorway. Lily looked at him with the specific expression of someone who had not been doing anything wrong and was confused about the intervention. What? Don't editorialize. What's editorialize? Saying things about people that they're standing right there to hear. Lily looked at Diana. Is that what I was doing? Diana, who had been watching all of this with the expression of someone watching a nature documentary, said, Yes, but you were also right, so it's complicated. Emily caught Asher's eye across the kitchen, and the corner of her mouth moved in the way that meant she was working hard not to laugh. He gave up on the doorway and came in and poured more coffee and sat at the far end of the table with his back to most of it, because Lily was more herself when she didn't feel observed, and Emily seemed to be doing perfectly well without his interference. They talked for another 20 minutes, Lily and Emily, in the unhurried way of people who have found an unexpected wavelength. He heard it in pieces. The wolves, the documentary about dolphins, the letter-writing campaign, Emily asking questions about the painting that was in his office, and Lily explaining the moon's emotional state with increasing specificity. He heard Emily ask what Lily was going to paint next, and Lily say she was thinking about painting the ocean, but wasn't sure because she'd never seen the ocean and didn't want to get it wrong. I haven't seen it in a long time, Emily said. I might be getting it wrong in my memory. That's okay, Lily said, with the large generosity of the young. Wrong is just a version you didn't plan. He heard this and set down his coffee cup and looked at the surface of the table for a moment. Wrong is just a version you didn't plan. He was going to need to write that down. He wasn't sure for what purpose yet. It felt like something worth keeping. Lily eventually slid off the counter, deposited her bowl in the sink with the careful precision of someone who'd been taught exactly how to do this and took pride in it, said bye, Emily, without ceremony, and disappeared upstairs to whatever the morning held for her. Emily watched her go. Then she turned back to the grant application and said to Diana, Okay, the program narrative section. Tell me what's wrong with it. Everything from the third paragraph, Diana said, but we can fix it. They fixed it. Asher worked at his end of the table, nominally, though he was mostly listening, to the two of them working, the productive back and forth of people who both know their respective business and are willing to be direct about it. Emily was good with language in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. She could see a sentence that wasn't working and identify exactly which word was causing the problem, which was a skill he associated with people who read widely and specifically. Diana, who was unsentimental about writing, said at one point, You should have been an editor. And Emily said, I thought about law school. And Diana said, Same problem, better pay. And they moved on. Around noon, Diana declared the application done, or at least done enough to submit, and began gathering her pages with the efficiency of someone who had another 3 things on her Saturday. She stopped at the door and looked at them both with an expression Asher recognized as Diana. Choosing not to say the things she was thinking, she said, I'll send over the final version by end of day, and left. They were alone in the kitchen, which had not been planned, and the house had the specific quiet of a Saturday, with Lily occupied somewhere upstairs, and the city muffled outside. Emily looked at the cleared table, then at him. I should probably... Have you had lunch? He said. She paused. I had coffee. That's not lunch. It was a big coffee. I'm making eggs, he said. Sit down. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He was already at the refrigerator. I want to. Sit down, Emily. She sat down. He made eggs, scrambled, with cheese the way Lily had taught him she preferred after a period of extensive experimentation, which turned out to also be the way he preferred them. He made toast. He put things on the table without ceremony and sat down across from her. She ate. He ate. Outside, a November Saturday moved through its quiet business. She's extraordinary, Emily said. Lily. Yes. She looked at her plate. The thing she said about wrong being a version you didn't plan. She's 5. She'll be 6 in February. She's been like this since she could form sentences. Does her mother know? How? She stopped. That's an intrusive question. Ignore it. Her mother knows, he said. She loves Lily fiercely. We just couldn't find a way to be good to each other while also being good parents. So we separated the two problems. Emily nodded. Is that hard? The separation? It was harder in the first year. He turned his toast. Now it's just the shape of things. We're civil. We coordinate. I think we're better to Lily as two parents who are honest about what they are to each other than we were as two people performing something neither of us fully felt. That's mature. It took a while to get there. Most things do. She ate. Can I tell you what I was thinking about on the way over here? Yes. She looked at him across the kitchen table, in the daylight, which was different from every previous context. The café, the restaurant, the evening street. Daylight was less forgiving and more honest, and she seemed entirely comfortable in it, which he found again quietly extraordinary. I was nervous, she said. On the way over. About what? About, she turned her fork. This, the house. Lily. She paused. About it being real. Everything in context together. The last few weeks I've been very aware of the gap between my life and yours. Spatially, financially, structurally. She looked up. And I kept telling myself it doesn't matter, and then I'd drive past a building with your company's name on it and think, it might matter. He put down his fork. Does it? Now that you're here? The house is large, she said. The kitchen is larger than my apartment. That's true. And it feels like a home, which surprised me. I expected it to feel like a statement. It did feel like a statement for the first 2 years. He looked at the kitchen. Lily happened. And a house that is a statement is not a place a 5-year-old thrives, so things changed. The painting in your office, Emily said. The moon being nervous. It's a child's painting in a corner office in a company that manages multi-hundred-million-dollar funds. Yes. And that doesn't... She seemed to be choosing words. You don't feel any tension between those two things? He thought about it honestly. I feel more tension when it's not there, he said. When I'm in the office and everything is controlled and curated and optimized and there's no... He stopped. No sign that any of it is connected to anything that actually matters. The painting is a sign. He paused. She asked me to put it where I'd see it without turning around. She was very specific. She said, you should be able to see it while you're working, Dad, not just when you remember to look. Emily was quiet for a moment. She's trying to take care of you, she said. I know. He said it with something in it. Not quite pain, but the specific weight of being known by someone small enough to say it simply. I know she is. Does that make it harder or easier? Both, simultaneously. He picked up his fork again. She's 5 and she understands something about me that I'm still working out. They ate in the comfortable silence that had started to develop between them. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say, but the silence of two people who have found that they don't need to fill every space, which is a different thing entirely and much harder to find. I want to say something, Emily said, and I want to be careful about how I say it. He waited. I've been careful, she said, Mom, since the café, since Halcyon, since the market and the bookshop and all of it. I've been managing my distance, deliberately. She looked at him. And I want you to know I've noticed I've been doing it, because I don't think it's fair to you to do it without saying so. I've noticed, he said. I know you have. She set down her fork. You've been patient about it, which, she paused. That matters to me. You've been patient without making me feel managed. You don't like being managed. I really don't. The ghost of a smile. My therapist says it's because I had years of things being outside my control, and now I compensate by needing to feel like I'm choosing. That sounds accurate. She's good. Emily looked at the table. What I want to say is, I know why I've been careful. I understand the reason. 7 years of something becoming a compass point, and now the compass point is a person who is sitting across from me making eggs on a Saturday morning, and that's... She stopped, started again. The version I carried was safe. This version requires something from me. What does it require? She looked at him directly. Believing that it's real, she said. That you're real. That this... She gestured, not quite at him. More at the space between them, the kitchen, the morning, all of it. That this is a real thing that could go somewhere. Not just a story with a beautiful ending. She paused. Because I've been living inside a story with a beautiful ending for 7 years. The man who stopped. The moment that changed things. The clean, complete narrative. She held his gaze. And this isn't that. This is messier. It requires me to be present in it, not just narrating it. Asher was quiet for a moment. The house settled around them, the small sounds of Saturday, Lily somewhere upstairs, presumably constructing something or writing a letter to someone. Can I tell you what I see? He said. Yes. I see someone who built something real from very little, over a very long time, with no guarantee it would work. He said it evenly, not as a speech, just as what he saw. I see someone who tells the truth even when it would be easier not to, who asked me uncomfortable questions and received uncomfortable answers without flinching, who sat in my kitchen this morning and talked to my daughter like she was a person, which sounds like a low bar and isn't. He paused. I see someone who is afraid of exactly the right things, which is not the same as being too afraid to move. Emily looked at him. I'm not in a hurry, he said. I told you that at Halcyon. I meant it. He held her gaze. But I also want to be clear that this is not... I'm not here because it's an interesting story, or because I feel some obligation to the night on the bridge. He paused. I'm here because of the woman at table 4 who said the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years, and then kept saying honest things for 3 hours, and then texted me 4 days later to tell me I'd been right about something and rude about it simultaneously. A beat. That's who I'm here for. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen light was gray and soft through the November windows, and she had flour on her sleeve from Diana's paperwork session that neither of them had mentioned, and her hair was starting to come loose from where she'd put it up, and she was the most real person in any room he'd been in for longer than he could accurately calculate. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay. She picked up her fork. I'm going to try to be less careful. You don't have to be less careful, just... Present, she said. Yes. She nodded once, the way she did when she'd made a decision and was done deliberating. He recognized this. He'd been watching her make decisions for a month, and they all had this quality, the moment where the calculation ended and the direction was chosen. She was quiet for a moment, eating, and then she said, Lily asked me if I like wolves. He looked at her. When? While you were in the doorway pretending not to listen. I wasn't pretending. You absolutely were. No heat in it, just fact. She asked me if I liked wolves, and I told her I thought they were interesting, but I didn't know enough about them, and she said she could explain. Emily paused. She's invited me to watch the wolf show with her sometime. He absorbed this. What did you say? I said I'd like that. She looked at him over the table. If that's... Yes, he said. That's fine. That's more than fine. She nodded, ate. Outside, November did what November does. Can I ask you something? He said. You don't have to ask anymore. You can just ask. He registered that, filed it. The grant application, the one you've been doing for Clara, at cost, in your evenings, unpaid. Yes? You know it's unsustainable. I know. But you also know that what you get from it isn't quantifiable in the same way. She looked at him. Where are you going with this? I'm not going anywhere with it. I'm just saying, you understand the difference between what's financially rational and what's worth doing for other reasons. You live it, with Clara. He paused. So you understand it when other people do the same. She frowned. What other people? Me, with Monroe Capital. He turned his cup. The portfolio company that's underperforming. The one I mentioned once, the quarterly review. It's a green tech startup, small. The financial case for cutting them loose is clear. We've carried them for 2 years longer than the numbers justify. He paused. They're building water purification technology for communities that can't access clean water in 3 countries. I've been carrying them because I believe in what they're doing, not because the return timeline makes sense. Emily was still. The board knows, he said. They're patient because the other funds perform well enough to allow for it, but it's not financially rational. He looked at her. I don't tell that story in profiles. No, she said quietly. You wouldn't. I tell it to you, he said, because you'll understand what I mean when I say that not everything I do is about the return. She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. The particular look of someone finding what they suspected was there. How long have you been carrying them? She said. 2.5 years? What's the technology actually doing? Currently operating in 2 communities in West Africa and 1 in Central America. It's providing clean water access to approximately 43,000 people. He said it without flourish. The scale-up model works. The commercial viability is still 18 months out, minimum, maybe more. But you believe it gets there. I believe it gets there, and I believe the 43,000 people aren't hypothetical while we wait for it to get there. A pause. I'm not made of good impulses. I've made decisions I'm not proud of. I've chosen the return when I shouldn't have, and I've rationalized things I knew were rationalizations. He looked at the table. But that one, I'm not letting go of that one. Emily was quiet for a long moment. You should have told me that a month ago, she said. I'm telling you now. It would have... She stopped, reconsidered. No, it's right that you told me now. Telling me sooner would have been strategic, a way to look better. Yes, she looked at him. You're getting better at timing. I'm trying. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The house was quiet in the specific way of somewhere with a child in it who is currently occupied, which is different from genuine silence, warmer, more provisional. Can I tell you what I've figured out? Emily said. Please. I came to the café to close a loop, she said. To say thank you and finish the chapter and walk away with it complete. That's what I told myself. She looked at the table. What I didn't let myself think about was what I'd do if the chapter didn't want to close. She looked up. It didn't want to close. No, he said, and I've been managing that fact for a month, trying to keep it at the size of something manageable, something I could explain to myself without it getting too large. She paused. It keeps getting larger. What does larger mean? He said. Specifically, she met his eyes. It means I think about the conversations after they're over. It means when something happens during the week, a difficult client, something that goes wrong, something small that's funny, my first instinct is to tell you. She said it plainly, without performance. It means Lily's invitation to watch the Wolf Show mattered to me in a way I wasn't prepared for. A pause. It means I'm not closing the loop. I'm extending it. The November light moved through the windows, and somewhere upstairs Lily was doing something that involved moving furniture by the sound of it, and the city made its indifferent Saturday sounds around them. That's good, Asher said, extending the loop. It's terrifying, Emily said. But yes. She picked up her coffee cup. Also good. They sat in the kitchen of a house that was too large and had a moon painting on the office wall, and a small person upstairs who thought wrong was just a version you didn't plan, and the coffee had gone cold again the way it always did when they were talking, and neither of them reached to fix it. The afternoon moved forward around them, slow and gray and November-specific, and neither of them was in any hurry to be somewhere else. Eventually, Lily came downstairs and stood in the kitchen doorway in her fox pajamas and said, "Emily, do you want to watch the wolves?" With the directness of someone for whom social hesitation had not yet been invented. Emily looked at Asher. He spread his hands. "Don't look at me. This is between you two." She looked at Lily. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Lily turned and padded back toward the living room without ceremony. Emily got up and followed. Asher stayed in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the table with the 2 empty coffee cups and the scattered remnants of the grant application and the plates from the eggs. He heard, from the living room, the Wolf Show's opening music, that specific bright theme he'd heard 600 times, and then Lily's voice beginning its commentary, explaining to Emily what she'd missed so far, which was everything, which was going to take a while, which Lily clearly felt was not a problem. He stood in the kitchen and listened to his daughter explain the world to someone, and thought about a 25-year-old who stopped a car on a bridge without deliberating about it, and about ripples, and about how far they go, and about the specific impossibility of knowing, in the moment you make a small decision, what it will eventually become. He picked up the coffee cups, washed them, put them away. Then he went to the living room. There was room on the couch. He sat down. On the screen, a wolf was doing something important in a winter forest. Lily was explaining its motivations to Emily with the authority of a scholar in her field. Emily was listening with the real kind of attention. She glanced over at him when he sat down. A quick look, not long, but it was the kind of look that lands in the chest. He looked back at the screen. The wolf moved through the snow, and the story kept going. December came in cold and honest, the way the best things do, without announcement, without ceremony, just suddenly present and demanding to be reckoned with. 6 weeks had passed since that Saturday on the couch with the Wolf Show. 6 weeks of something that neither Asher nor Emily had named, not formally, not with the particular vocabulary that people use when they're trying to make something official. They hadn't needed to. The thing had its own shape by now, and naming it would have been like drawing a border around a river. Technically possible, practically beside the point. There were patterns. Emily came on Saturday afternoons when Lily was home, and on Wednesday evenings when Lily was with her mother, and the two contexts were different but not separate. Different the way the same person is different at work, and at rest, recognizably, the same underneath. On Saturdays, she arrived with her tote that was always too heavy, and Lily greeted her with the unsentimental warmth of someone who has decided you're acceptable and moved on from the decision. On Wednesdays, she and Asher cooked, badly, in the kitchen of the too large house because neither of them was particularly skilled at it, but both of them liked the project of it. The specific comedy of two otherwise competent people being reliably humbled by a risotto. The risotto had been Asher's idea. Emily had said, the second time, that she could bring soup from a place near her office. He'd said no. She'd said it would be edible. He'd said that was a low standard. She'd said his standards were the problem. They'd made the risotto again, and it had been better than the first time, but still not quite right. And they'd eaten it anyway, with a determination that had made them both laugh. He told Diana about Emily, which Diana had taken with the expression of someone who already knew and had opinions she was saving for an appropriate moment. Marcus had known for 3 weeks before Asher said anything, because Marcus paid attention to things people didn't know they were broadcasting, and had simply said, "I'm glad, Mr. Monroe," and let that be everything he needed to say. Clara had warmed to Asher over the course of 2 more visits to the bookshop, not in the gushing sudden way of someone converted, but in the gradual testing way of someone who takes friendship seriously and doesn't extend trust cheaply. She'd stopped calling his tie ambitious and started calling him by his name, which Emily had told him was a significant upgrade. He'd started bringing good coffee from the place on Meridian Street when he came, because the bookshop's coffee was, as advertised, terrible, and Clara had accepted this with the grace of someone who knows they're being taken care of and decides to allow it. He'd met Emily's therapist briefly, which hadn't been planned. They'd run into her outside the community center where Emily had an appointment, and Emily had introduced him with the particular directness she used when she'd already decided something. The therapist had shaken his hand and said, "Emily speaks well of you." And Asher had said, "She's honest about everything, so that means something." The therapist had smiled in the way of someone receiving useful data and moved on. He hadn't met anyone from Emily's family because there wasn't much family to meet. She'd mentioned this early on in the flat way of someone who has made their peace with a fact without pretending it didn't cost anything. A mother she wasn't close to, no siblings, a father she hadn't spoken to in 11 years. The architecture of her life had been built largely without the support structures that most people lean on, which explains something about its specific tensile strength. You learn to carry your own weight when there's no one to share the load. And Emily had learned it so completely that she sometimes forgot to put it down even when someone offered. This was still the thing. The careful edge that hadn't fully dissolved. He'd felt it in small moments, the slight hesitation before she accepted help with something, the reflex to minimize when she was struggling, the way she sometimes caught herself being present and pulled back half a step, like someone who'd leaned too far over a railing and corrected. He didn't push on it. He understood the mechanism. He had his own version of it, the billboard distance he maintained from most people, the professional remove that had calcified over years into something that felt like personality. What he had come to understand, over 6 weeks of patterns, was that Emily's careful edge and his own distance were not incompatible. They were, in fact, two people who had both learned to protect what survived, recognizing the pattern in each other, and choosing, incrementally, to put it down. The crisis, when it came, arrived the way most real crises do. Not dramatically, not with warning, not with any of the signals that fiction trains you to look for. It arrived on a Tuesday morning as a text message with 2 sentences. The Delgado account just pulled out. I need to think. He was in a board meeting. He read it under the table, which was something he never did, and excused himself after the next agenda item, with an apology he didn't fully mean, and stepped into the hall. The Delgado account was Emily's largest client. He knew this not because she'd told him in those terms, but because he'd listened carefully over 6 weeks and assembled the picture. Daniel Delgado, restaurant group owner, 3 locations, the account that had given her consulting business its first real financial stability when he'd come on board 14 months ago. He paid on time. He referred people. He was the client that made the cash flow math work in the months when other clients were slow. He called her. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He texted, "Call me when you can. I'm here." He went back into the board meeting. He sat through 40 minutes of a conversation about a commercial real estate acquisition that was genuinely important and could not hold his attention at all, which was a new experience for him and not entirely comfortable. She called at noon. "I'm okay," she said, first thing before he could ask. "I just needed a couple hours." "What happened?" "He's moving his business to a firm downtown. Full-service accounting, tax, the works. He outgrew what I can offer." A pause. "Which is correct. He's at a scale now where he needs more than one person. I knew this was coming." Another pause, shorter. "I just didn't know it was coming today." "How bad is it, financially?" "Manageable," she said, with the specific flatness of someone performing certainty they haven't fully reached yet. I'm not going under. I have 5 other clients, the new florist. Clara. I'll be tight for a couple months while I replace the revenue." "Emily." "What?" "How bad is it, actually?" A longer pause. He could hear her breathing, the background sounds of wherever she was, the shared workspace, probably, the coffee station in the hall. "Tight for a couple months is optimistic," she said, more quietly. "It's probably closer to, I'll need to find 2 new clients at a reasonable rate within 60 days, or I'll be burning through savings at a pace I don't love." "Okay," he said. "I'm not asking for anything." "I know you're not. I'm just telling you, because you asked." "I know." He leaned against the hallway wall. "Thank you for telling me." She was quiet for a moment. He could feel her on the other end of the call, working out whether to say the next thing. "This is the part that's hard," she said. "For me. This specific—" She stopped. "I've been here before. Tighter than this, actually. I know what to do. I know the steps." A pause. "But telling you about it feels different than dealing with it. Because you're—" She stopped again. "Because I'm not a spreadsheet," he said. "Because you have resources I could ask you to use," she said, more precisely. "And I won't. And I need you to know I won't, because if I ever got to a point where this, she gestured at the space between them, which he understood even through a phone call, became a transaction, I would not recover from that. Emily, he said, I know. I need to say it. Say it. I will not ask you for money. I will not ask you to use your contacts to send clients my way. I will figure this out the way I've figured everything out. Her voice had the specific quality of someone making a vow to themselves with a witness. That's not pride. It's, I built something real. And if I let it become dependent on who I'm seeing, it stops being real. I understand that completely, he said, and I wouldn't offer. Not because I don't want to help, but because you're right about what it would cost. A beat. Okay, she said. Okay. I'm going to make some calls this afternoon, she said, the business clarity coming back into her voice, the pivot she made when she decided the feeling part was done for now. I have 2 warm leads I haven't followed up on, and I've been thinking about raising my rates for existing clients for 3 months. This is probably the thing that makes you do it, he said. Yes. A short exhale. The thing that makes me do it. Call me tonight, he said. Not about the business, just call. A pause. Okay, she said. I will. She did. At 9:15 from the floor of her apartment, he could tell from the way the sound landed, the specific acoustic of a small room and someone sitting on the floor with their back against the couch. She told him about the 2 calls she'd made, one of which had gone well, and one of which had gone nowhere, and about the email she'd drafted to her existing clients raising her rates by 20%, which she'd written 4 different times before sending the version that was direct without being apologetic. She told him Clara had called and offered to increase what she paid, and Emily had said no. And Clara had said some things that were probably true, and Emily had said she knew, and they'd ended the call with the specific understanding of 2 people who had known each other long enough to disagree clearly and remain. He told her about the board meeting and the commercial real estate acquisition and the fact that he'd spent 40 minutes of it unable to think about anything except whether she was okay. He said this without calculation, as a simple piece of information. She was quiet for a moment after. You were in a board meeting, she said. Yes. About something important. Significant dollar figures, yes. And you couldn't concentrate. Correct. Another pause. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it. It's just what happened. Asher. Yes. I'm going to be okay, she said. Not as a reassurance for you, as an actual statement of fact. I'm going to figure this out and it's going to be fine, and in 6 months, this will be the thing that made me raise my rates when I'd been avoiding it for a year. I know, he said, but right now, tonight, it's hard, she said. And I'm on my floor and my back hurts and I've had too much coffee and not enough food and I'm not great. I know that too. And I'm still calling you, she said, which is, she paused, new. Calling when it's hard. Calling when it's hard, she confirmed. Instead of waiting until I've fixed it to report back. A pause. My therapist will be very pleased. She sounds like someone worth keeping. She is. A beat. So are you, said quietly, almost as an aside, the way she said things when they mattered most, without volume or ceremony. Just said. He sat in his study, in the dark, with the city outside the window doing its nighttime business, and thought about a woman on the floor of her apartment with a sore back and too much coffee, and the specific courage it takes to call when you haven't fixed it yet. Get off the floor, he said. Eat something. I have crackers. That's not a... I know. I'm getting up. The sound of movement, the particular acoustic shift of someone standing. I'm up. Good. Good night, Asher. Good night. She hung up. He sat in the dark for a moment longer. Then he went to check on Lily, who was asleep in the specific dramatic sprawl of someone who falls asleep completely and without reservation. One arm hanging off the edge of the bed, the closet light on, the door cracked at exactly the right angle. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought about what his grandmother would have called a good use. He thought it was starting to look like this: the phone calls in the dark, the cold risotto, the crackers on the floor, the things that don't make the profile. He thought it was starting to look like exactly this. The rate increase email got 3 responses by the next morning. 2 clients wrote back with variations of course, your work is worth it. And one wrote a longer email that was part pushback and part genuine financial difficulty, which Emily spent 40 minutes responding to with a payment plan and a revised timeline that worked for both of them. She told him this over the phone on Wednesday evening while he was in the car with Marcus, and her voice had the specific quality of someone who had moved through the hard part and come out on the other side of it, not triumphant, just clear. The 3rd client, she said, the one with the pushback. She's been with me since the beginning. She paused. I couldn't let the rate increase break that. So you found a way. I found a way. A pause. Which probably means I'll do this with everyone who pushes back, which is not a sustainable business model. No, he agreed, but it's who you are. Is that a flaw? It's a tension, he said, between the thing that makes you good at the work and the thing that makes the work hard to scale. He paused. You'll figure out where the line is. You're already finding it. That's a generous reading. It's an accurate one. She was quiet for a moment. I raised my rates, Asher, after a year of knowing I should and not doing it. I know. That's the thing I'm most proud of this week. Not finding a new lead, not fixing the payment plan, just doing the thing I'd been avoiding because I was afraid of what it said about how I valued my own work. He understood this completely. The specific weight of the thing you've been circling for a long time and what it costs to finally walk straight at it. Your grandmother would have liked you, he said. It came out before he'd fully decided to say it. She was quiet for a second. Why? Because you say things are true when they are, without needing them to be comfortable first. He paused. She had no patience for comfortable untruths. She thought they were the most expensive kind. Expensive how? Because you pay for them in decisions made on bad information. He looked out the car window at the December city, the light smeared on the wet pavement, the specific beauty of a place at night that you've been in long enough to love without thinking about it. She used to say the truth is the only thing you can actually build on. Everything else is a foundation that moves. Emily was quiet for a long moment. She sounds like someone I would have liked too, she said. I think so. I think she'd have found you interesting in the specific way she found things interesting. He paused. She'd have argued with you. About what? Something you said that she thought was only half right. She had a gift for finding the half that was wrong and making you work for the other half. A pause. She'd have respected you for not backing down. How do you know I wouldn't back down? Because I've watched you for 6 weeks. A short silence. Warm, not uncomfortable. I wish I'd known her, Emily said. I wish you had too. They were quiet together for a moment, in the particular way that people are quiet when they're each inside something real, and the connection holds it without needing to fill it. Wednesday? She said. Wednesday, he confirmed. The risotto on Wednesday was, for the first time, genuinely good. He didn't know what he'd done differently. Maybe the stock, maybe the timing, maybe just the accumulated practice of failing at it enough times that the right thing finally clicked. Emily took the first bite and looked at him with an expression of exaggerated suspicion. Don't, he said. I'm not saying anything. Your face is saying it. My face is saying this is significantly better than last time. Which was your prediction? My prediction was edible on a good day. She took another bite. This is actual food. Thank you for the technical distinction. She smiled, the uneven one, and ate, and he ate, and the kitchen was warm in the specific way of somewhere people have cooked together, the smell of it still in the air, the particular domesticity of 2 people at a table that had become familiar. I want to tell you something, she said, when the plates were mostly empty. You keep starting sentences that way, because I keep needing to say things carefully. I know. He looked at her. Go ahead. She turned her wine glass. The December dark pressed against the kitchen windows, and beyond them the city moved at its winter pace, slower and quieter than October, the year winding toward its end. When I walked into that cafe 7 weeks ago, she said, I had a plan. A very specific plan. Say the thing, thank you, close the loop, leave. She paused. The plan was designed to be complete, finished, something I could file and move on from. I know. The reason I needed it to be finished, she said, was because I'd been living with an open loop for 7 years, something unresolved, and I'd made my peace with it, I thought. But there was always this... She stopped, chose the word carefully. Incompleteness, something that never had an ending. He waited. I don't have an open loop anymore, she said. She looked at him directly. That's what I wanted to say. I came to close something, and instead I started something, and the starting of it closed the old thing in a way that the ending I'd planned never would have. A pause. The man on the bridge stopped being the thing I navigated by, and the man across from me became... She stopped again. The present tense, he said. Yes, simply. The present tense. He set down his wine glass. I want to tell you something too, he said. Okay. I've spent the last several years believing that the things I was best at were the things I could measure. He said it slowly, the way of someone examining an old belief and finding it worn down in places. Returns, metrics, market positions, board confidence, things with numbers, things you can run a model on. He paused. And then this woman walks into a cafe and says she owes me her life for something I'd filed under miscellaneous and couldn't fully remember, and I spent the next 7 weeks. I've been paying attention to things I can't measure. Like what? Like what it feels like when the person you want to call is the first one you think of. Like the way Lily's paintings made more sense when you asked about them. Like the specific warmth of a kitchen when 2 people have been cooking in it, even badly. He looked at her. Like the fact that the most important thing I've done in the last decade, by every measure that matters to me now, was stopping a car on a bridge for an hour when I was 25 and had no idea what I was doing. Emily looked at him. Her eyes had gone bright in the way they had at the cafe. The first night, the first look, the tears she'd blinked back with the practiced control of someone who cries only when alone. Except she didn't blink it back this time. She let it be there. You remembered, she said. I've been remembering more, he said. Over the last 7 weeks, things I'd filed away. The cold. The specific sound of that bridge in winter. He paused. I don't remember your face. I don't remember what you were wearing, but I remember the decision to stop the car. And I've been thinking about that decision. He held her gaze. I've been thinking that some things you do without knowing why, and the reason arrives years later. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, 7 years later, in a cafe with bad lighting and a jazz trumpet that couldn't decide what it was doing. Good coffee, though. The coffee was fine. A pause. The company was better. He reached across the table. Not dramatically, just across the checked tablecloth between the wine glasses and the dishes, his hand open. An offered thing, not a demanded one. She looked at it for a moment, then she put her hand in his. They sat like that for a while. In the kitchen, in the December dark, while the city moved outside the windows and the year wound toward its ending and the risotto plates went cold on the table, the way things do when 2 people have found something more interesting to attend to. It was Lily who moved things forward, because it was almost always Lily. It was a Sunday, 2 weeks before Christmas, and Lily had woken up with what she described as a very important idea, and what Elena described as a very specific agenda. And the agenda turned out to be a visit to the Natural History Museum's winter exhibition on ocean life, which Lily had been researching independently based on her desire to paint the ocean without getting it wrong. She announced this at breakfast with the calm authority of someone presenting a fait accompli. She had looked up the exhibition hours. She had determined it was reachable by subway, which she considered more interesting than the car. She had established that the museum had a café, which she noted as relevant logistical information. And, she said, looking at Asher with the specific expression of someone who had been thinking about this longer than the morning, Emily should come. Asher looked at her. Emily has her own plans on Sundays. You could ask, Lily said. That's what asking is for. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back with the patient composure of someone who had made her position clear and was willing to wait for the adult to catch up. He texted Emily. He reported Lily's exact argument, including the comment about what asking is for. The reply came in 4 minutes. She's not wrong. I'm free. What time? They took the subway, which Lily narrated the entire length of, providing commentary on the other passengers with a combination of observation and speculation that was both accurate and occasionally too loud. Emily sat next to Lily and received this commentary with the full attention she gave everything, and Lily, aware of the quality of her audience, performed accordingly. The exhibition was 3 rooms of carefully lit ocean life, the deep sea, the coral ecosystems, the polar waters, and Lily moved through it with the focused intensity of someone taking notes. She asked questions of the museum guides with the directness of someone who expected complete answers and waited patiently for them. She stood in front of a large photograph of the North Atlantic in winter for almost 5 minutes without speaking, studying it. That's what it looks like, she said finally. The color. Which color? Emily asked. The gray-green one. I thought it would be blue. She looked at the photograph. But it's not blue. It's gray-green with bits of other things. She turned to Emily. Did you know it was gray-green? I think I'd forgotten, Emily said. But yes, that's right. Lily nodded, satisfied, and moved on. Asher walked behind them and watched his daughter explain something about bioluminescence to Emily, and Emily listening with the real kind of attention, asking follow-up questions that showed she'd actually heard what was said. He watched Lily reach up and take Emily's hand without comment. Just did it, the way she sometimes took Elena's hand or his hand, a simple reaching out. And Emily looked down at the small hand in hers with an expression that moved through surprise and arrived somewhere much warmer. She didn't look at Asher. She didn't need to. They ate at the museum café, which was adequate, Lily's word, and Lily drew in the small sketchbook she'd brought, attempting the gray-green ocean color with the watercolor pencils she'd received the previous birthday and had been deploying with considerable seriousness ever since. Emily watched her work and made no suggestions, which Lily appreciated and rewarded with a detailed explanation of her technique. It's not quite right yet, Lily said, studying her work. What's not right about it? Emily asked. The depth, Lily said. Real water has depth. Mine looks flat. How are you going to fix it? Lily considered this. More layers, probably, but the first layer has to be dry. She put down her pencil. What did you want to be when you were little? The question landed with the sudden directness that Lily's questions always had. No preamble, no context, just the thing she'd been wondering delivered with total confidence in its relevance. Emily looked at her. I wanted to be a librarian, she said. For a long time. Why? Because I liked books, and I liked order, and a library seemed like a place where both things were always true. Lily absorbed this. Why didn't you? Life went a different direction, Emily said, and it turned out I was better at numbers than I thought. Do you like numbers? I like what numbers tell you, Emily said. Numbers are just a language for talking about what's real. Lily looked at her with the expression she had when she was deciding whether something was true. She appeared to decide it was. I like letters better, she said, but I'm going to learn numbers too. A pause. Dad says you have to know both. Your dad's right. Lily glanced at Asher with the brief acknowledgement of someone granting a point, then returned to her drawing. Are you going to keep coming on Saturdays? She said, not looking up. Emily looked at Asher. He didn't help her. This was between them. I'd like to, Emily said, if that's okay with you. Lily looked up from the drawing. The direct taking stock look that Asher recognized as the same look her grandmother had given him sometimes, the one that saw through the surface to the actual state of things. You make the risotto better, she said. I don't think that's... Last Wednesday it was actually good, Lily said, before it was trying. She returned to her drawing. You can keep coming. Asher looked at Emily across the cafe table. She had the particular expression of someone trying very hard not to let the full force of a feeling show in public, and not entirely succeeding. He thought, this is what it looks like. Not the clean version, not the one that would fit in a headline or a profile, or any of the curated spaces where he'd been trying to live. This is the actual thing. A child's judgment on the quality of a risotto, a hand reaching out on a subway platform, an ocean that turned out to be gray-green when you'd been thinking it was blue. He thought about what Emily had said in the kitchen, the present tense, how the open loop had finally closed, not by being ended, but by being extended into something new. 7 years of something carried carefully across difficult ground, and it had arrived here, at a museum café table with watercolor pencils and an adequate lunch, and it was nothing like the story she'd been telling herself about how it ended. It was better. Irregular and human, and better. The December afternoon was dark by the time they came back out of the museum, the city's early winter nightfall settling around them at 4:30, the streets lit against it with Christmas lights and the warm windows of restaurants and the particular amber of the street lamps that Asher had been noticing more since a Thursday night in October when he'd stood outside a cafe and watched a woman he didn't know yet turn a corner. Lily was tired in the specific physical way of someone who has spent their whole self on a day and run the reserves down to the bottom. She walked between them on the sidewalk without ceremony, one hand in Asher's and one hand, after a moment's consideration, in Emily's, and she didn't comment on the arrangement, and neither did they. They took the subway back. Lily fell asleep against Emily's arm, somewhere between the second and third stop, with the absolute trust of someone who has decided a place is safe, and Emily looked down at her with the expression she'd had in the museum when Lily had reached up for her hand, that surprised arrival at something warmer. "She does this to people," Asher said quietly. "I can see why," Emily said. Her voice was careful in the way of someone holding something they don't want to disturb. "She's never been a tentative kid," he said. "She just decides. And then she's decided and it's done, and she moves forward. She gets that from you. She gets it from herself. I just gave her the environment where it could develop without getting knocked out of her." Emily looked at him over Lily's sleeping head. "That's not nothing," she said. "That's actually most of it." He thought about what that meant, the deliberate daily work of protecting something from being diminished. The decisions that didn't feel like decisions in the moment, because they were just the shape of how he tried to be in that specific corner of his life. He thought about his grandmother saying a good use, and he thought, yes, this is the good use. This and the water purification project, and the conversations in the dark, and the honest things said across tables in cafes and restaurants and kitchens where the risotto kept getting better. This was the ledger that mattered, and it was fuller than he'd realized. At the house, Elena took a barely wakeable Lily upstairs with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it many times, and Asher and Emily stood in the entrance hall in their coats in the specific moment after a long day when you're not quite sure what comes next. "I should probably," Emily started. "Stay," he said, "for a while." She looked at him. "For a while." "Or longer," he said, "if you want." She looked at the entrance hall, the ceilings she'd noticed the first time, the scale of the house she'd said felt like a home rather than a statement. She looked at him. "I'm still figuring out how to be here," she said. "In this, without it feeling like I'm—" She stopped. "Without it feeling like you're asking for something," he said. "Yes," said quietly. I know it's not rational. I know you're not—" "Emily!" He said her name with enough weight to stop the sentence. "I know." A pause. "I'm not asking you to feel comfortable before you are. I'm asking you to stay for a while, tonight, because I'd like you to." She looked at him for a moment. Then she unwound her scarf and put it on the entrance table. "Okay," she said. They sat in the kitchen for 3 more hours, not doing anything particular. He made tea. Badly, and she fixed it without saying anything about fixing it. She told him about a book she'd been reading, the one from Clara's shop about the woman who kept starting over in new cities, and her opinion of the ending, which was complex. He told her about the water purification company, a development he'd heard from them that week, a new pilot in a 4th community, the technology working in ways that exceeded the original model's predictions. He said it with the specific warmth he never brought to board meetings, the warmth of someone who is allowed, in this room, to care about what they care about without managing it. She listened. She asked real questions. She got the specific thing he was saying underneath the things he said. At 11 o'clock, she gathered her tote bag, still too heavy, always too heavy, and put her scarf back on, and he walked her to the door. They stood in the entrance hall again, in the opposite direction from before. "The loop is closed," she said. Not a question, just said, naming something that had been true for a while. "Yes," he said. "And something else is open," she said. "Yes." She looked at him. "I'm not afraid of it anymore," she said. "The opening, I thought I would be for longer, but she considered. "I'm choosing it, actively. Not because it's safe, because it isn't. Not because I know how it goes, because I don't." She held his gaze. "Because it's real, and real things are worth the cost." He thought about a bridge in a snowstorm, about the decision to open a car door without knowing what came after, about how the things that matter most are almost never the ones that feel significant in the moment. They're the small, impulsive, unremarkable choices that you don't realize you're making until 7 years later when someone walks into a café and tells you. He thought about what his grandmother would have called this. He thought she'd have called it a good use, the best kind. "Real things are worth the cost," he said. "Yes." She kissed him, not dramatically, just the way she did everything, without performance, arriving directly at the thing she meant. His hand came up to her face, and they stood in the entrance hall of a house that was too large and had a child's moon painting on the office wall, and a kitchen where the risotto had finally gotten good. And it was not a clean ending, and it was not a tidy resolution, and it was exactly what it was supposed to be. When she stepped back, her eyes were clear. "Good night, Asher Monroe," she said, for the third time since they'd known each other. The same words, a completely different weight. "Good night, Emily Carter," he said. She went down the front steps and out into the December cold, and he stood in the open doorway and watched her reach the sidewalk, and this time she looked back. She lifted a hand, brief, easy, and then she turned and walked toward the street where her cab was waiting. He stood in the doorway until she was gone. The cold came in around him, December specific, with the smell of the city in winter, the dry, electric cold of a night that is going to be clear, the particular quality of air that has no rain in it. He looked up. Between the buildings, between the towers, the sky was doing what it does in December in the city when the clouds have finally moved off, showing you just enough stars to remind you they exist, a handful of them, faint against the ambient glow, steady. He thought about Lily on the subway, asleep against Emily's arm with the full trust of someone who had simply decided. He thought about a gray-green ocean in a museum photograph that turned out not to be blue. He thought about layers, and how the first one has to be dry before you can put down the next one, and how the depth only comes after time. He thought, this is how it starts. Not with a revelation, not with the clean narrative of a man who stopped a car and a woman who survived and the story that tied them together in a bow. It starts in the middle, unglamorous and particular, with bad risotto and good coffee, and a child's judgment that cannot be bribed, and a woman who carried something across 7 years and arrived, finally, at the place where she could set it down. It starts like all real things start, imperfectly, honestly, with no guarantee of how it goes from here, only the direction, only the decision to keep walking. He closed the door against the December cold. Upstairs, Lily was asleep with the closet light on and the door cracked at exactly the right angle. The house settled around him, quiet and warm and specific to the lives being lived inside it. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment in the silence. Then he turned off the light and went upstairs. The story did not end. Stories like this one don't end. They go on in the daily, unremarkable way of lives that are actually being lived, in the kitchen on Wednesday nights, on the subway on Sunday afternoons, in the phone calls made before the problem is fixed rather than after, in the layers that take time to dry, in the decisions that don't feel like decisions until years later, when someone walks through a door and tells you what they meant. What Asher Monroe understood in December was this. The most important thing he had ever done was a small thing. An hour on a bridge in the snow. It had not felt important. It had not required courage or strategy or the considerable intelligence he'd spent his whole career believing was his primary asset. It had only required him to stop the car, to be present, to treat a stranger like she mattered. He had driven away and forgotten. She had walked away and rebuilt. And 7 years later, the ripple had come back to him, not as a debt paid or a loop closed, but as a beginning, as the thing that started everything else. This is what kindness actually costs. Almost nothing. An hour. Some cold. The decision not to keep driving. And this is what it can do, given time and distance and the long arc of things. It can return to you in ways you cannot predict, through doors you didn't know were open, wearing a blue cardigan and carrying a tote bag that's always too heavy, with 7 years of hard evidence that the world contains the kind of person who stops. Some things you do without knowing why. The reason arrives later. That is enough. That has always been enough. That is everything.